Hi everyone, we are Nightmare Narratives and we are here to help you today. I know you will use this video to fall asleep before, so like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. It was a calm, late autumn evening. The wind, crisp and cold, swept through the tall trees that lined the forest behind my house. The leaves, once bright green, were now a fiery mix of red and orange, rustling softly in the fading daylight. I'd always found the view from my back porch peaceful, nature's beauty on display. But that night, something felt different. I had returned home from work, exhausted. The comforting silence of the woods was supposed to help me unwind, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at the edges of my mind. My house sat at the edge of town, backed by a thick forest that stretched for miles. Living there alone didn't bother me until that evening. I had just sat down with a cup of tea when my eyes were drawn to the treeline. There was something there, in the distance. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, the fading light playing with my tired eyes. But as I squinted, I realized there was more to it. Among the darkened branches and swaying leaves, something else stood out, motionless, unlike the rest of the forest. A face, or at least, it seemed like a face, pale, ghostly, and partially hidden behind the branches. It wasn't human. Something about its shape was unnatural, unsettling. My heart skipped a beat as my mind raced. Could it have been an animal? A reflection of light? The wind whispered through the trees, sending chills down my spine. I blinked, shaking my head, trying to dismiss the eerie sight. But when I looked back, the face was still there, watching me, unmoving. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Seconds felt like hours as I stared at it, unsure of what to do. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only the rustling of the trees. I stepped back into the house, closing the door behind me. My hand lingered on the lock, securing it tightly as if that would keep whatever was out. My mind raced. Was it just my imagination, or had I truly seen something? I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than fatigue, but deep down, I knew something strange had happened. The feeling of being watched lingered, even after I pulled the curtains closed, shutting out the forest from view. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts drifted back to that pale face. Its cold, hollow stare was burned into my mind. I told myself it was nothing, that the mind plays tricks in the fading light of dusk. But sleep didn't come easily. Could it have been something watching me? The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, bathing the room in a soft, warm glow. The events of the previous night felt like a distant dream, foggy and surreal. As I sat up, I questioned my own memory. Had I really seen a face, or was it just my imagination running wild? Trying to shake off the lingering unease, I made my way to the kitchen. The familiar routine of brewing coffee and preparing breakfast should have brought some comfort. But as I stood by the window, looking out at the forest again, that same gnawing feeling returned. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and nothing seemed out of place. No strange figures, no unsettling faces, just a quiet piece of nature. But even in the daylight, I couldn't help but feel watched, as if those woods held secrets I wasn't meant to uncover. Later that day, I found myself wandering towards the edge of the forest. The closer I got, the more my heart raced. Why was I doing this? Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe I just wanted proof that it was all in my head. The boundary between my yard and the woods felt like a line between safety and something unknown. I hesitated for a moment before stepping beyond that invisible barrier. The crunch of leaves under my feet seemed louder than usual, the air cooler as I moved deeper into the trees. I scanned the area, searching for any sign of what I had seen the night before. But there was nothing, just the same tall trunks, the same rustling leaves, and the same peaceful silence. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it was all just a weird trick of the light. But then I saw it. Half buried under a pile of leaves was something that didn't belong. A piece of torn cloth, weathered and dirty. It looked like it had been there for days, maybe even weeks. I knelt down, hesitantly brushing the leaves away. The cloth was stiff, cold to the touch, and had an odd, almost metallic smell. My heart thumped in my chest as I picked it up, unsure of what I was holding. As I stood there, clutching the fabric, a sudden rustling noise came from behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The trees stood still, unmoving. But there, at the very edge of my vision, I caught a glimpse of movement. A flash of something pale, darting behind the trees. It was the face again, or at least I thought it was. This time, it wasn't as distant as before. It had been closer, watching me from behind the trees, only to disappear the moment I looked its way. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the cloth in my hands as my body tensed with fear. Whatever it was real, and it was watching me. I backed away slowly, not daring to take my eyes off the trees. The wind picked up, howling through the branches, as if urging me to leave. My footsteps were shaky, my breath shallow, and by the time I made it back to the house, I was running. Inside, I slammed the door shut, locking it tight. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I leaned against the door, struggling to catch my breath. The torn cloth still hung limply from my hand, a reminder that what I had seen wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Something, or someone was out there. I spent the rest of the day inside, keeping all the doors and windows locked. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced out the window, I half expected to see that face staring back at me from the forest's edge. That night, as darkness fell, I sat in my living room, lights blazing, but the sense of security they offered was thin. I kept glancing at the window, half dreading what might appear beyond it. I was no longer questioning whether it was real. I knew it was, but what did it want? I spent hours, unable to sleep, waiting for something to happen, until exhaustion finally took over. But even then, I couldn't escape it. In my dreams, I saw that pale face, closer than ever, staring at me with empty, hollow eyes. And in those eyes, I saw something chilling, something that whispered one terrifying truth. It wasn't going to stop. The following morning, I woke drenched in cold sweat. The vivid dream of the pale face had left a deep pit in my stomach, and even though I was awake, the unease refused to fade. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside felt ominous. I avoided looking out of the windows for most of the day, unable to face the thought of seeing that figure again. The torn cloth sat on my kitchen table, a reminder that whatever I had seen wasn't just a dream. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I didn't want it near me either. It felt like an anchor to the eerie presence that now seemed to linger around my home. The hours ticked by slowly, my mind racing with possibilities. Could it have been a prank? Was someone deliberately trying to scare me? Or was there something more sinister lurking in those woods, something that defied logic and explanation? By late afternoon, I had decided I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next unsettling encounter. I needed answers. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I decided to visit my neighbor, Mr. Harding. He had lived on the property next to mine for decades and knew the area better than anyone. If there was something strange about the forest, he would know. I grabbed the torn cloth and headed over, my heart beating a little too fast. Mr. Harding's house was old and worn, much like the man himself, but he had a reputation for being sharp-minded and observant. As I knocked on his door, I could feel my palms sweating. What if he thought I was crazy? The door opened with a creak, and there he was, Mr. Harding, a wiry old man with a stooped back but piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He looked me up and down before raising an eyebrow. "Well, look who it is. What brings you by?" he asked, his voice gruff, but not unkind. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain what had been happening. "Mr. Harding, have you ever noticed anything strange about the woods?" I asked, holding up the piece of cloth as proof of my bizarre encounter. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something, concern maybe, crossing his face. He invited me in, gesturing toward a chair by the fireplace. I sat down, the old wood creaking under my weight, while Mr. Harding took a seat across from me. "You saw something, didn't you?" he said, his voice quieter now, more serious. I nodded, explaining everything. The face in the window, the cloth I had found, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. As I spoke, Mr. Harding listened intently, his gaze never leaving mine. When I finished, he sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "You're not the first to see things in those woods," he said finally. "I've heard stories about people seeing things that shouldn't be there. Faces, figures, things that don't belong in this world." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? Like ghosts?" Mr. Harding shook his head slowly. "Not ghosts. Something worse. Those woods. There's something ancient about them. Something that's been there long before any of us. People who go in there, they don't always come out the same." I felt a lump forming in my throat. "Has anyone disappeared?" He nodded grimly. "A few. Over the years. Some folks said they just up and left town. But others, they were never seen again. And the ones who stayed, they changed. Like something had gotten into their heads, made them see things. Dark things." I sat in stunned silence, my mind racing. It all sounded too surreal, too much like a horror story. And yet, the fear in Mr. Harding's eyes was unmistakable. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Stay away from the woods," he said firmly. "Whatever you saw, whatever is watching you, it wants something. And if you keep poking around, it'll find a way to get it." His words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and I realized just how deep I had wandered into something far beyond my understanding. I thanked Mr. Harding for his time and left his house, my mind swirling with a mix of fear and disbelief. As I walked back to my own home, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Harding hadn't told me everything. He knew more than he was letting on, but whether out of fear or caution, he had held something back. When I reached my house, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the yard. I hurried inside and locked the door behind me, my heart pounding as the daylight began to fade. I didn't dare look out the window again. That night, as I lay in bed, the wind outside seemed to howl louder than ever. My mind replayed Mr. Harding's words, over and over. Whatever I had seen, it wasn't going to stop. And as sleep finally overtook me, I dreamed of the woods again. Only this time, I wasn't alone. The dream was different this time. I was standing in the forest, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to sway and groan as though alive. The air was thick, oppressive, and the eerie face was no longer watching from the distance. It was close, too close. I could feel its presence hovering just beyond my sight, like a shadow lurking in the periphery. I turned in slow circles, my heart racing, trying to spot it before it reached me. But no matter where I looked, the face was just out of reach, teasing me, toying with my fear. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush, growing louder with each step. Someone or something was approaching me. I tried to move, but my feet were rooted to the ground, as though the forest itself had claimed me. A whisper echoed through the trees, faint and distorted, as if carried on the wind. It was a voice, but I couldn't make out the words. The more I strained to listen, the fainter it became, until all that was left was silence. An unnatural, suffocating silence that pressed in from all sides. And then I woke up. The darkness of my bedroom greeted me, but it was far from comforting. My heart was still racing, and sweat clung to my skin as I sat up in bed, trying to shake off the remnants of the dream. I rubbed my eyes and glanced around, expecting to see something, anything, that didn't belong. But my room was just as it always was, empty, or so I thought. A faint sound reached my ears, barely audible at first. It was a soft, repetitive noise like a creaking door or a distant thump. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen. The noise was coming from downstairs. I threw the covers off and hesitated for a moment. Every instinct told me to stay in bed, to lock my door and wait until morning. But something deeper urged me to move. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know what was happening in my house. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and crept out of my room, the beam of light cutting through the thick darkness as I made my way down the stairs. The noise was growing louder now. Thump, creak, like someone walking through the house, their steps methodical, deliberate. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The front door, it was wide open again. A cold gust of wind rushed through the house, sending shivers down my spine. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my eyes darting around the room. There was no one there, but the door hadn't opened on its own. Someone had been inside. Someone had opened it. As I stepped toward the door to close it, the beam of my flashlight caught something. A figure, standing just beyond the threshold, half hidden by the shadows. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I knew. I knew it was the same figure from the woods. The same face that had watched me from the forest. The same face that had appeared in my dreams. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as I forced myself to speak. "Who are you?" There was no response. The figure remained still, silent, its presence more oppressive than ever. I took a step forward, my pulse racing, but as soon as I did, the figure vanished. Gone in the blink of an eye, as if it had never been there at all. I rushed to the door, slamming it shut and locking it behind me, my hands trembling. I leaned against the door, my mind reeling. What was happening? Why was this figure haunting me? And more importantly, what did it want? The wind outside howled against the house, rattling the windows as though demanding entry. I backed away from the door and turned to head back upstairs when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There, on the floor just inside the doorway, was a trail of dirt. It led from the front door and disappeared down the hallway, as if someone had walked through the house, leaving footprints behind. My stomach churned with a mix of fear and dread. Someone had been inside. But how? There were no other signs of entry, no broken windows, nothing. Just the dirt and the open door. I followed the trail of footprints cautiously, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls as I made my way down the hallway. The trail led to the back of the house, to the small utility room that I rarely used. The door was ajar, the faint sound of creaking coming from inside. I pushed the door open with trembling hands, the beam of my flashlight sweeping the room. It was empty, completely empty. But the footprints, they stopped right at the center of the room, as if the figure had simply vanished into thin air. I stood there, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. I backed out of the room slowly, closing the door behind me. That night, I slept with the lights on, my door locked, and the covers pulled tightly around me. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that no matter how many doors I locked or lights I left on, that face, those eyes, would find a way back inside. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet, as if the events of the night before had never happened. The dirt trail from the front door had mysteriously vanished, leaving no trace of the strange visitor. The utility room, where the footsteps had ended, looked untouched, as though no one had been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. I tried to shake off the lingering fear as I went through my day, but it clung to me like a shadow. Everywhere I went, I felt watched. At work, at the grocery store, even driving home, I caught myself glancing into my rearview mirror more times than I could count, half expecting to see the eerie face from the forest staring back at me. By the time evening rolled around, I had convinced myself that it was all in my head, that I was letting my fear of the unknown get the best of me. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. The house, usually a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside sent my heart racing. I tried to distract myself with TV, flipping through channels aimlessly, but nothing could hold my attention. My mind kept wandering back to the night before, to the figure that had stood at my front door, watching me in silence. Then, out of nowhere, the whispers began. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a distant hum that could be easily dismissed. But as the minutes ticked by, the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was a voice, soft, insistent, and far too close for comfort. I muted the TV, straining to listen. The whispering continued, coming from somewhere within the house. It was unintelligible, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. But it was there, undeniably real, and growing louder by the second. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and grabbed the flashlight from the coffee table. The air in the house felt thick, oppressive, as though the very walls were closing in on me. The whispering seemed to be coming from the hallway, the same direction the dirt trail had led the night before. I took a deep breath and headed toward the hallway, my footsteps hesitant. The whispering grew louder as I approached, but the words remained just out of reach, frustratingly garbled. It felt like I was being pulled toward the source, some invisible force urging me forward. The hallway stretched out before me, dim and foreboding. The door to the utility room was closed, just as I had left it that morning. But now, the air around it seemed to pulse with energy, as if something on the other side was waiting for me. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The whispering was deafening now, swirling around me like a storm. I could almost make out the words, almost, but not quite. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was dark, the air inside colder than the rest of the house. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The whispering stopped abruptly, plunging the room into an unsettling silence. For a moment, I stood there, frozen in place, scanning the room for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, no footprints, no figure, no face watching from the shadows. Just the cold, oppressive silence. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow, darker than the rest, shifted in the corner of the room. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. My heart raced as I turned the flashlight toward it, the beam illuminating the empty space. But the shadow didn't disappear. It remained, lurking just out of reach, as if it was part of the darkness itself. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't move, didn't respond. But the whispering began again, soft and taunting, as though it was coming from inside my own head. I backed out of the room, my hand shaking as I slammed the door shut. The whispering continued, growing louder, more insistent, as if whatever was inside that room was trying to break free. I ran back to the living room, my mind racing. What was happening to me? Was I losing my grip on reality? Or was there something far more sinister at play? As I stood there, trying to make sense of it all, a single, terrifying thought entered my mind. What if it wasn't the house that was haunted? What if it was me? The rest of the night passed in a blur of restless anxiety. Sleep was impossible, not with the whispering still lingering in my mind, and the unsettling sense that I wasn't alone in my own home. I stayed on the couch, every creak and sigh of the house making me flinch. At some point during the night, I must have dozed off because I woke to the pale light of dawn creeping through the blinds. For a brief moment, there was peace. The whispering had stopped, the house was still, and everything seemed back to normal. But that peace was shattered when I saw the window. It was the window in the living room, just a few feet from where I'd fallen asleep. And there, staring back at me through the glass, was a face. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The face was pressed against the glass, pale and expressionless, with hollow eyes that seemed to peer straight through me. It was the same face I had seen in the forest, the same one that had watched me from the shadows. For a moment, we just stared at each other, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It was as though it had been standing there all night, watching me while I slept. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Run? Confront it? Every instinct told me to get as far away from that window as possible, but my legs refused to move. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the face vanished. One moment, it was there, pressing against the glass with those hollow eyes. The next, it was gone, as if it had never been there at all. I rushed to the window, peering out into the yard, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the yard was empty, the morning fog hanging low over the grass. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone having been there. It was like the face had been a ghost, an apparition that dissolved into the mist. I backed away from the window, my pulse still racing. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain. The whispering, the face, the strange trail of dirt leading to the utility room. It all felt connected. like pieces of a puzzle that I couldn't quite fit together. But one thing was certain, I couldn't stay in that house. I grabbed my phone and keys, and without even bothering to change out of my clothes from the night before, I headed for the front door. I needed to get out, to breathe, to put some distance between myself and whatever was haunting me. As I stepped outside, the fresh air hit me like a wave, calming the frantic beat of my heart. The world outside seemed so normal, so mundane, that for a second I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. But then I glanced back at the house. There in the upstairs window, the window to my bedroom, was the face again, watching me. This time, it wasn't pressed against the glass. It stood back, half obscured by the curtains, but I could see it clearly. The same hollow eyes, the same expressionless stare. It was waiting for me, watching. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I jumped into my car and drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere had to be safer than here. As I sped down the road, a thought crept into my mind, chilling me to the bone. What if the face wasn't tied to the house? What if it could follow me, no matter where I went? I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind still reeling from the image of the face in the window. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching me, even as I sped down empty streets, past houses that were beginning to wake with the light of dawn. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, snapping me back to reality. It was a text from Sarah, my best friend. She had been checking in on me regularly since I'd told her about the strange occurrences, though I hadn't mentioned the face yet. Part of me had been too afraid to even say it out loud, as if acknowledging it would make it more real. "Are you okay? You're never up this early," the text read. I wanted to tell her everything, to unload the fear, the confusion, the sleepless nights. But I didn't know where to start. How do you explain to someone that you're being haunted by a face that appears out of nowhere, with no reason or logic? I pulled into a nearby park, the engine idling as I stared at her message. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of what to type. Finally, I settled on something vague. I just needed some air. Couldn't sleep. As soon as I hit send, I felt a surge of frustration. This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of person who ran from problems or let fear control me. But right now, fear had wrapped itself around my thoughts like a vice, and no amount of reasoning or logic could make it loosen its grip. I glanced around the park. The early morning fog clung to the ground like a ghostly blanket, the trees casting long shadows in the dim light. Despite the serene surroundings, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. There was something about that face, those hollow eyes, that unnerving stillness, that had burrowed deep into my mind. It didn't feel human. It felt ancient, like it had been watching for a long time, waiting for the right moment. I checked the rearview mirror, my heart skipping a beat when I caught a glimpse of something in the distance, a shadowy figure, standing by the edge of the trees. It couldn't be. I whipped around, scanning the park, but the figure was gone. My pulse quickened, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. I could have sworn I saw someone there, just for a second, standing perfectly still. Was it the face? Had it followed me? My phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah. "You sure you're okay? You've been acting off lately." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced back at the trees. This wasn't over. I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just haunting my house. It was following me, watching me, waiting for something. And now it was getting closer. I slammed the car into drive, peeling out of the park as fast as I could without thinking. My mind raced with possibilities. Was I going crazy? Was this all in my head? Or was something much darker at play? Something I couldn't understand? I needed answers. And there was only one place I could think to go. My family's old cabin. It was isolated, tucked away in the woods, a place we used to visit every summer when I was a kid. I hadn't been there in years, but it was the only place that came to mind. Somewhere remote, far from the prying eyes of the town. If I could get there, maybe I could figure out what was happening. Maybe I could confront this thing once and for all. The road stretched out before me, the morning light creeping over the horizon as I sped toward the cabin. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still behind me, following me. The road leading to the cabin was narrow, winding between tall trees that seemed to close in the deeper I drove. The forest here had always felt different, older, as if it held secrets long forgotten by the world. Even in daylight, the canopy was so thick that only slivers of sunlight broke through, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the ground. I hadn't been to the cabin in over a decade. It had been my father's retreat, a place of solitude where he would go to escape the pressures of everyday life. After he passed away, I never found the heart to come back. But now, with the face haunting my every step, it felt like the only place left where I might find answers, or at least a chance to confront whatever this was. As I neared the cabin, I slowed the car, the gravel crunching under the tires. It stood exactly as I remembered, a small, rustic structure nestled at the edge of the dense woods. The windows were dusty, the porch slightly warped from years of neglect. The place had an air of abandonment, but it also felt like it was waiting for me. I stepped out of the car, the cool air hitting my face. The stillness of the forest was unnerving. There was no wind, no birds, nothing but an oppressive silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the front door. It creaked open easily, the inside just as dusty and untouched as the exterior. The smell of aged wood and musty air filled my lungs, memories flooding back of childhood summers spent exploring the woods and sitting by the fire with my family. But those memories were distant now, overshadowed by the dread that had been following me. I locked the door behind me and set my bag down. The cabin was small, just a main room with a kitchen and a couple of bedrooms down the hall. I wasn't sure what I expected to find here, but there was a pull, a feeling deep in my gut that told me this place held some connection to whatever was haunting me. After setting up a small fire in the fireplace, I sat on the worn couch, staring at the flames. My mind kept replaying the moment I saw that face in the window, those hollow eyes boring into me, devoid of any human emotion. What did it want from me? My phone buzzed again, startling me. It was Sarah. "Hey, I'm worried about you. Where are you?" I hesitated before replying. Part of me didn't want anyone to know where I was, but I couldn't ignore her concern. "I'm at my family's old cabin. Just need some time to clear my head." She responded almost instantly. "Cabin? Alone? That doesn't sound safe, especially after what you told me." I had been careful not to tell her too much, but she knew something was wrong, and I couldn't blame her. Everything that had happened in the past week felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "I'll be fine. Just need some space." I set the phone down and leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. The cabin creaked with age, the sound oddly comforting, like the place itself was alive, sheltering me from the world outside. But that comfort was short-lived. As night fell, the shadows inside the cabin seemed to grow longer, darker. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting flickering light across the room, but it did little to dispel the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. I could feel it, the presence, the same one that had been watching me, haunting me. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. This thing had followed me here, and it was waiting. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing with questions. Why me? What was this thing? And why now, after all these years? As I walked past one of the windows, I froze. There, just beyond the tree line, I saw it. The face. It was watching me again, half hidden by the shadows of the trees, the pale skin almost glowing in the darkness. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. A surge of fear gripped me, but something else stirred inside, anger. I had run from this thing long enough. Without thinking, I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and stormed outside, my pulse racing as I made my way toward the spot where I had seen the face. The forest was unnervingly silent, the only sound the crunch of leaves under my boots. I shone the flashlight through the trees, the beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no sign of the figure. Just empty woods. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice echoing through the stillness. Nothing. I spun around, scanning the trees, but there was no movement, no sound. It was as if the face had never been there at all, but I knew it was watching me. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from behind me, and I whipped around, heart pounding. The flashlight beam landed on something half buried in the ground, a small, wooden box covered in dirt and leaves. I knelt down, brushing the debris away. The box was old, the wood weathered and cracked, but it had a strange, almost familiar energy to it. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly, the faint light from the flashlight casting shadows over the words. "I've been waiting for you." My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the note in my hand. The words, scrawled in hurried, jagged handwriting, sent a chill down my spine. I instinctively looked around, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement, any hint that I wasn't alone out here. The forest remained still, almost unnaturally so. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I reread the message. "I've been waiting for you." The eerie weight of the note pressed down on me, the implications hanging in the air. Waiting? For me? How long? Why? I stuffed the note back into the wooden box, my mind racing. It wasn't just the strange face or the chilling sensation of being watched. It was the deliberate nature of it all. This wasn't a random haunting or some figment of my imagination. Whatever this was, it had a purpose. I hurried back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me as I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The air inside was stifling, heavy with the scent of burning wood from the fireplace. It felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. Sitting down at the small kitchen table, I placed the box in front of me, staring at it as if it held the answers to everything. My fingers traced the weathered wood, the rough texture grounding me as I tried to make sense of what was happening. This thing had been following me, haunting me, and now it wanted something. But what? I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket and pulled it out. Sarah's name flashed on the screen again. "You okay?" Her message read. "I've been worried. You haven't responded." I debated whether to reply. What could I say? That I was being stalked by something supernatural, something that had been waiting for me? "I'm fine," I typed, pausing before sending it. "Just need some time alone. I'll explain everything when I get back." I didn't know if I believed that. I wasn't even sure I'd make it back. Something told me that whatever was happening wouldn't let me go easily. The cabin creaked again, the sound louder this time, more deliberate. My heart raced, the feeling of being watched creeping back over me. I stood up, moving to the window to look outside. Nothing. The woods were dark and empty. But I knew better now. Just because I couldn't see it didn't mean it wasn't there. I glanced at the box again, the note taunting me from inside. There had to be more to this story, more to what was happening. My father had spent years coming to this cabin, years I never fully understood. What if this thing, whatever it was, hadn't just been waiting for me? What if it had been waiting for him too? I rushed to the back room, searching through the few belongings my father had left behind. Old books, weathered notebooks, and random tools cluttered the shelves, but nothing seemed out of place, nothing out of the ordinary. Until I found a small, leather-bound journal hidden beneath a pile of dusty papers. My hands shook as I opened it, flipping through the pages. Most of the entries were mundane. Notes about repairs to the cabin, thoughts on the weather, the usual musings of a man living in solitude. But then, toward the back, the entries changed. The handwriting grew more frantic, the words more disjointed. "It's here again," one entry read. "I saw it in the woods, just beyond the tree line. Watching, waiting." I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I thought I was imagining it at first, but it's real. It's been following me, watching me. I don't know what it wants, but I can feel it closing in. My father had seen it too. He had been haunted by the same thing. I flipped to the last entry, dated just a few days before he died. "It won't stop. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, it's there. Watching, waiting." I don't have much time left. The journal slipped from my hands, the weight of the realization sinking in. My father had been running from this thing, just like I was now, and it had finally caught up to him. I looked back at the box on the table, the note burning in my mind. "I've been waiting for you." A cold chill washed over me as I realized the truth. This thing hadn't just been waiting for me. It had been waiting for us. For my father. For me. For anyone who dared to step foot in these woods. And now, it had me exactly where it wanted. A sudden noise outside broke my thoughts. A soft, almost imperceptible rustling, like someone or something was moving through the trees. I grabbed the flashlight again, my hands trembling as I slowly approached the window. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees beyond. And then I saw it, the face, closer this time, just beyond the porch, staring at me with those same hollow, lifeless eyes. I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. My breath came in short, panic gasps as I backed away from the window. It was here. I had nowhere to run. The face, barely illuminated by the faint beam from my dropped flashlight, remained motionless outside the window. Its hollow, empty eyes bore into mine with a piercing intensity, and every fiber of my being screamed at me to run. But where could I go? The door was no longer an escape. Whatever this thing was, it had been watching, waiting for me, and now it was right at my doorstep. The cabin, once a safe haven, felt like a trap closing in around me. My breathing was shallow, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. I forced myself to pick up the flashlight, the metal cold in my shaking hands. I flicked it back on, its weak light slicing through the darkness as I scanned the room, looking for anything that could serve as protection. The face hadn't moved. It simply hovered there, expressionless, as if daring me to do something. I knew running wasn't an option. Whatever this was, it would follow me, relentless, unyielding. I could feel its presence, the weight of its gaze pressing down on me, suffocating me. In a surge of desperation, I yanked open the journal I had found, flipping through the pages once more, searching for any clue that my father might have left behind. There had to be something, some way to end this, some explanation for why this thing had chosen us. I skimmed over his frantic notes, the words blurring together in my panic. Then I found it, a single sentence, scrawled in shaky handwriting near the end of the journal. It only wants what it lost. My heart skipped a beat. What it lost? What did that mean? I read on, hoping for more, but there was nothing, just a vague, cryptic message. I slammed the journal shut, frustration bubbling up inside me. How could my father have dealt with this and left me with so little to go on? The creaking sound of the cabin floorboards snapped me back to the present. The face had disappeared from the window, replaced by the unsettling silence of the woods. But I knew it wasn't gone. I could feel it. Slowly, I stood up, gripping the flashlight tightly as I edged toward the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob, hesitating. What if it was waiting for me on the other side? What if the moment I opened the door, it would come for me like it had for my father? But I couldn't stay here, trapped in this cabin with no answers, no way out. With a deep breath, I twisted the doorknob and yanked the door open. The night air hit me like a wall, cold and thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. I shined the flashlight out onto the porch, sweeping it over the dark woods. Nothing, but I knew better than to trust the darkness. Taking cautious steps outside, I called out, my voice trembling. "What do you want? What did you lose?" The silence that followed was deafening, the trees looming like silent sentinels around me. I felt ridiculous, standing there in the dark, talking to whatever malevolent force was haunting me. But I had to try. I had to know. Then a voice, faint, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. "Give it back." I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hands as I looked around wildly. "What? What do you want back?" The voice came again, clearer this time. "Give it back." A chill ran down my spine as I realized the voice wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from behind me, inside the cabin. I spun around, the flashlight beam darting over the front door, which was now wide open. My heart raced as I stepped back inside, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. But I couldn't. Something was drawing me back. I followed the voice to the kitchen, where the wooden box still sat on the table. The note was inside, and the moment I saw it, everything clicked. The box, the face, the message. This thing, it wasn't just haunting me. It wanted the box, the note, whatever was inside. I stepped closer, hesitant, my fingers brushing the rough surface of the wood. "This?" I whispered. "Is this what you want?" The cabin groaned in response, the walls seeming to close in around me. The air grew heavier, colder, as if the very house itself was alive with the presence of whatever haunted it. I picked up the box, holding it tightly. The voice whispered again, closer this time. "Give it back." With shaking hands, I opened the box and took out the note, my mind racing. The cryptic message from my father made sense now. This thing had lost something, and it thought I had it, but I didn't know what it was. "Not really. I don't have what you're looking for," I said, my voice cracking. "This isn't mine. I don't know what you lost, but this box isn't it." The voice fell silent. For a moment, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the eerie stillness of the cabin. Then, slowly, I felt the weight lift. The oppressive presence that had haunted me for days seemed to fade, the air growing lighter. The walls no longer seemed to press in, the cold dissipating. I set the box down, my heart still pounding in my chest. Had I done it? Had I finally broken free of whatever this was? As I stood there, catching my breath, the realization hit me. It wasn't over. I may have given back what I thought it wanted, but the face, the thing that had watched me from the woods, haunted me in the cabin. It wasn't done with me. And I knew, deep down, that it never would be. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. It was just another Tuesday afternoon when I decided to visit the local cafe, a cozy little spot that had become my refuge from the chaos of life. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sweet scent of pastries wafted through the air, inviting me in. As I settled into my usual corner table, I pulled out my notebook, ready to jot down thoughts and ideas for my next project. The cafe was relatively quiet, with only a few patrons scattered about, each engrossed in their own world. I took a sip of my cappuccino, letting the warmth wash over me, when a chill ran down my spine. I felt a presence, an awareness that made the hair on my neck stand up. Looking up, I spotted a stranger seated at a table across the room, his eyes locked onto me. He was tall, with tousled dark hair and an air of confidence that bordered on unsettling. There was something familiar about him, yet I was sure I had never met him before. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying to shake off the sensation of being watched. After a moment, he stood up and walked toward me. My heart raced as he approached, a mix of curiosity and apprehension flooding my mind. Was this some sort of coincidence? Did he really know me? "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Do you mind if I join you?" I hesitated but nodded, unable to find my voice. He took a seat across from me, his intense gaze never wavering. "I've seen you here before," he said, leaning slightly forward. "You come here every Tuesday at this time, don't you?" The casual observation sent a shiver through me. How could he know that? It was an unremarkable detail, yet it felt invasive. Yes. I like the coffee here," I replied, attempting to keep my tone light despite the unease building within me. "I can understand that," he replied, a slight smile playing on his lips. "But it's not just the coffee, is it? You come here to escape, to write?" I frowned, my pulse quickening. It was true. I often used this cafe as a sanctuary for my thoughts. But how could he possibly know that? "Who are you?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just a stranger," he said, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "But I feel like we have a lot in common. We both enjoy solitude, don't we? And the thrill of writing." I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me. This was no ordinary stranger. He spoke as if he had been watching me, studying me for some time. "Why do you say that?" I pressed, my instincts urging me to be cautious. "Because I see you," he replied, his tone shifting. "You're searching for something. Answers, perhaps? Or maybe just a connection that seems to elude you." I could hardly breathe, the room suddenly feeling too small. I wanted to get up and leave, but I was rooted to the spot, intrigued and terrified all at once. "Do you really know anything about me?" I asked, challenging him. "Or is this just some game?" He chuckled softly, and it sent another chill through me. "Oh, it's not a game. I know things about your past, your struggles, the way you write, pouring your heart out onto the page, hoping for validation." I stared at him in disbelief. How could he possibly know any of that? "Who sent you?" I demanded, feeling an adrenaline surge. "Are you working for someone?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. No one sent me. I simply have a knack for observing people. And I'm not the only one. What do you mean? I felt my pulse quicken, a sinking sensation settling in my stomach. Let's just say there are others who have taken an interest in you. Be careful, he said, his voice low and serious. You might not be as alone as you think. The words hung heavy in the air between us, a foreboding that seemed to seep into my very bones. I felt the weight of his gaze, a strange mixture of concern and menace that sent my heart racing. Why are you telling me this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Because you deserve to know the truth, he replied. And I can help you if you're willing to listen. I opened my mouth to respond, but found no words. The cafe, once a safe haven, felt suddenly hostile. I needed to escape this unsettling conversation, yet I was compelled to hear more. Can I trust you? I finally managed to ask. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Trust is a fragile thing, isn't it? But I assure you, I have your best interests at heart. I consider my next move carefully. Could I really trust this man who seemed to know so much about me? Or was he simply playing a game, one that I had unwittingly stumbled into? With a mixture of fear and curiosity brewing within me, I knew this encounter would change everything. In the days that followed my encounter with the stranger at the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The man's cryptic warnings haunted me, and every casual glance from a passerby, every whisper of wind, set my nerves on edge. My once comforting routines now felt like traps, like he had marked me in some way, leaving me exposed. I avoided the cafe for a week, opting instead to write from home. The usual quiet of my apartment, once a source of peace, now felt stifling. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify the unsettling silence that clung to the walls. It wasn't long before I started noticing small, strange things. My belongings, seemingly untouched, felt out of place. A book I hadn't read in months was suddenly lying open on my desk, as if someone had thumbed through its pages. My laptop, which I was meticulous about locking, had been left on more than once, displaying files I didn't remember opening. At first, I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, the aftershocks of an unsettling encounter. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening, after a particularly long day, I arrived home with an uneasy feeling. I couldn't pinpoint why, but it felt like someone had been there recently. The air in my apartment was thick, stifling, as if someone had disturbed it and left it hanging in their wake. My heart raced as I approached the door to my bedroom. The door was ajar. I never left it open. My breath caught in my throat. For a brief moment, I considered turning around, leaving the apartment, and never coming back. But I needed answers. Summoning all the courage I could muster, I pushed the door open the rest of the way. Everything seemed normal. My bed was neatly made. The books on my nightstand were stacked just as I'd left them. Yet something felt off. I scanned the room, my gaze falling upon the window. It was locked from the inside, just as I always kept it. But then I saw it. Something subtle but undeniable. A smudge on the window, right where someone's hand might have pressed against the glass. A chill ran down my spine as I approached the window, heart pounding in my ears. The smudge was faint, almost as if someone had tried to wipe it away. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. Had someone been standing here, watching me while I slept? And if so, why? I backed away from the window, my mind swirling with fear and confusion. The stranger's words echoed in my mind. You're not as alone as you think. Was this what he had meant? Had someone been watching me, observing my every move? The thought made my skin crawl. Desperate for answers, I decided to retrace my steps. I searched through my apartment, looking for any further signs of intrusion. But everything else seemed untouched. No forced entry, no obvious signs of anyone having been there. It was maddening, this sense that something was wrong, but no concrete evidence to prove it. I considered calling the police. But what would I tell them? That I had a feeling someone had been in my apartment? That I found a smudge on my window? It all sounded so absurd, like the plot of one of the stories I wrote. Besides, what could they do? Instead, I decided to install a security camera. I needed to know if someone was watching me, if they were coming into my apartment while I was away. It seemed like the only logical step to take. Over the next few days, I waited. I set up the camera to record while I was at work, hoping to catch something, anything, that would explain what was happening. But each evening, when I returned home and reviewed the footage, there was nothing out of the ordinary. No one had entered my apartment. No strange movements or sounds. Just the quiet, empty rooms. Still, the feeling of being watched never left me. It lingered in the back of my mind, creeping into my thoughts at the most unexpected times. And then, one night, something happened that shattered whatever sense of normalcy I had left. I was asleep, deep in a dreamless slumber, when a loud noise jolted me awake. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, my eyes scanning the darkened room. For a moment, I thought it had been my imagination, just the remnants of a bad dream. But then I heard it again, a faint creaking sound, like footsteps on the floorboards just outside my bedroom. I held my breath, listening intently. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped right outside my door. I didn't dare move. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Had someone broken in? Was the stranger from the cafe somehow involved? My thoughts spiraled, my body frozen in fear. Then, the doorknob slowly began to turn. The doorknob twisted slowly, the sound echoing in the silence of my room. My heart pounded in my chest as I held my breath, the weight of dread pressing down on me. The door creaked open, revealing a sliver of darkness that spilled into my room, followed by the silhouette of a figure. Frozen, I barely dared to breathe. The figure paused at the threshold, obscured by the shadows, as if waiting for something. My mind raced, scrambling for a plan, a way to escape. But I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot, with fear coursing through my veins. "Is anyone there?" A voice called softly, almost tenderly, cutting through the thick tension in the air. I didn't recognize the voice, but it carried a familiar, haunting timbre that sent a shiver down my spine. It was neither commanding nor aggressive, yet it held an unsettling allure, compelling me to respond. But what could I say? What was there to say when faced with a stranger in my own home? Silence lingered as I continued to stare at the shadowed figure. My thoughts flashed to the man in the cafe, the way he had leaned in, his eyes gleaming with knowledge that seemed to reach beyond the ordinary. I felt as though the stranger from the cafe had materialized here, taking form in the very darkness that surrounded me. "Please," the voice continued, almost pleading. "I just want to talk." A flicker of recognition sparked in me. Perhaps it was the same voice that had haunted my dreams, whispering unsettling words in the stillness of the night. The strange familiarity tugged at my memory, but it was drowned out by a rising tide of fear. What did they want from me? Why were they here? "Who are you?" I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper, barely audible over the rush of blood in my ears. I felt a mix of fear and anger bubble up within me, emboldening me to challenge this intruder. The figure stepped closer, revealing just enough to catch a glimpse of their face. A pale, gaunt visage stared back at me, framed by disheveled hair. They looked almost unearthly, as if the shadows had woven themselves around them. A chill swept through me as I noticed something flickering in their eyes. Was it madness, desperation, or something more sinister? "I'm here to help you," the figure said, an eerie calmness in their tone. "You don't know it yet, but you're in danger." I recoiled instinctively, retreating against the headboard, desperately seeking an escape. "Get out. I don't want any trouble." "No trouble, I promise," the figure replied, their voice low and soothing, as if trying to lull me into submission. "But you must listen. You need to know what's happening." My heart raced, a wild animal caught in a trap. I was torn between the instinct to flee and an overwhelming curiosity about the stranger's claims. "What do you know about me?" I asked, my voice steadier now, fueled by anger and a glimmer of defiance. "They're watching you," the figure said, stepping closer into the light that filtered from the window. "The people from the cafe. They're not what they seem. You're marked, and if you don't do something soon, it'll be too late." A chill swept through me. The memories of the cafe flooded back, the stranger's unsettling gaze, and their knowing words. "What do you mean, marked? Who are they?" "I can't explain everything now," the figure urged, glancing over their shoulder, anxiety flickering across their face. But trust me, I'm trying to protect you. I'm not your enemy. With every second that passed, my fear morphed into confusion, and I found myself grappling with a dangerous mixture of skepticism and intrigue. Why should I trust you? I challenged, my voice rising. You broke into my home. The figure flinched at my words, their expression shifting from calm to desperate. Because I'm the only one who knows the truth, they insisted, desperation lacing their voice. You have to believe me. There's no time to waste. I swallowed hard, fighting to maintain my composure. What truth? What do you want from me? I want you to help me stop them, they said, urgency spilling from their words. But you need to understand, there's a reason they're watching you. A reason they won't stop until they have what they want. Suddenly, the lights flickered, momentarily plunging my room into darkness. I gasped, feeling an instinctual need to shield myself from the unknown that loomed before me. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, desperately tapping the screen to illuminate the space. The figure's face was now illuminated, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Their eyes bore into mine, revealing a mixture of fear and determination. You don't have to do this alone, they pleaded, stepping closer. You can't fight them by yourself. My resolve began to crumble. A part of me wanted to scream, to call for help, but another part, the one tinged with curiosity, urged me to listen. What if this stranger held the key to understanding what was happening? What if I really was in danger? I need you to trust me, the stranger said, their voice softer now, almost a whisper. Please. I hesitated, teetering on the edge of decision. The allure of unraveling this mystery, of discovering the truth behind the shadows that loomed over my life, pulled me closer to them. But as my heart raced with uncertainty, I had to ask myself, was I making a grave mistake by allowing this stranger into my life? The weight of the stranger's words hung heavy in the air, a delicate balance between fear and a burgeoning sense of hope. I hesitated, my heart racing as I tried to reconcile the danger of the unknown with the allure of potential answers. Finally, I took a deep breath and nodded, albeit cautiously. Fine, I'll listen, I said, trying to maintain a facade of strength even as my insides churned with anxiety. But you need to explain everything. Who are you? Who's watching me? And why? The stranger stepped closer, the tension palpable in the small space of my room. My name is Sam, they said, their voice barely above a whisper. I know this sounds crazy, but I've been following the people from the cafe for a while now. They're part of something dangerous. Dangerous? I repeated, the word echoing ominously in my mind. What do you mean? They're not just ordinary people, Sam continued, their gaze intense. They're involved in something much darker, something that targets individuals like you. They see you as a part of their game. A game? I scoffed, my skepticism resurfacing. What do you mean by that? Sam took a step back, running a hand through their disheveled hair in frustration. They're hunting people, playing with their lives like they're pawns on a chessboard. I've seen it happen. They pick their targets, manipulate them, and then they disappear without a trace. Fear clawed at my insides, and I felt my throat go dry. Why me? I asked, my voice trembling. What do they want from me? I don't know yet, Sam admitted, their expression softening. But I've been watching you, and I have a theory. You've been marked for a reason, and I think it's connected to something you may not even be aware of. What do you mean? I pressed, my curiosity piqued despite the rising tension. There's a pattern, Sam explained, pacing my small room. The people who've been taken all had something in common. A past, a secret, a hidden talent. I believe you're part of that group. The implications of Sam's words settled heavily in the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth buried beneath the chaos. What's the connection? I asked, desperate for clarity. Your art, Sam said suddenly, locking eyes with me. I've seen your sketches. They're more than just drawings. They're visions. The people in the cafe, they see something in your work, something they can use. I frowned, the realization dawning on me. My art had always felt different, as if it tapped into something deeper. You think they want to use my art? I think they want to control it, Sam replied. And that's why they've been watching you. They want to understand your mind, to see what makes you tick. As the implications settled in, I felt a mix of fear and defiance rise within me. I won't let them, I declared, my voice stronger now. I won't become a pawn in their game. Sam nodded appreciatively. That's the spirit. But we need to be careful. We have to outsmart them if we're going to break free. Break free? I echoed, confusion swirling in my mind. What do you mean? First, we need to gather information, Sam said. We need to learn more about the cafe and the people there. I have a plan, but it's risky. Risky how? I asked, an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. I want you to go back to the cafe. Sam replied, their eyes narrowing in determination. You need to act normal, as if nothing is wrong. But while you're there, observe. Try to gather as much information as you can. I'll be nearby, watching your back. The idea terrified me. The cafe was where everything had started, where my life had taken a sharp turn into the unknown. What if they recognize me? I asked, panic rising. They won't if you're careful, Sam assured me. Just blend in. But you have to promise me you'll be cautious. If they sense something is off, it could be dangerous. As much as I wanted to argue, I knew deep down that Sam was right. I needed answers, and if that meant confronting my fears, then so be it. Okay, I said, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and adrenaline. I'll do it. Good, Sam said, a flicker of relief crossing their face. We'll meet back here afterward to discuss what you find. But first, you need to prepare yourself mentally. Prepare how? I asked, feeling a strange mixture of nerves and excitement. By remembering who you are, Sam replied softly. You're not just a target. You're a survivor, and you have the power to fight back. I took a deep breath, letting Sam's words sink in. I was terrified, but the thought of reclaiming my power fueled my resolve. I won't let them win, I vowed. As we finalized our plan, I felt an odd sense of camaraderie with Sam, a connection forged in the shared desire to uncover the truth. Despite the fear that loomed like a shadow over us, I could see a glimmer of hope, a flicker of a chance to turn the tide. The following day, the world outside felt strangely vibrant as I prepared for my return to the cafe. Sunlight streamed through my window, casting warm rays across my cluttered desk. But inside, I was a storm of anxiety and determination. With each passing moment, my heart raced faster at the thought of facing the unknown again. I meticulously selected my outfit, opting for a casual look that wouldn't draw attention. My reflection in the mirror showed a person filled with resolve, yet it was overshadowed by the anxiety of what lay ahead. I took a deep breath and steeled myself for the encounter, reminding myself of Sam's words. I wasn't just a target, I was a survivor. The cafe came into view as I walked down the familiar street, its inviting facade belied by the dread that churned in my stomach. I stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing softly, and immediately, the aroma of coffee and pastries wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. But beneath that comfort lurked an undercurrent of fear that made my skin crawl. I scanned the room, my gaze flitting over the familiar faces, trying to blend in with the other patrons. There they were. The group that had once seemed harmless now felt like a pack of wolves, their intentions hidden behind polite smiles and casual chatter. I took a seat at a small table in the corner, my pulse quickening as I pulled out my sketchbook, hoping to appear nonchalant. As I began to sketch, I felt their eyes on me. The woman with the striking green scarf was the first to catch my attention. She was laughing with a man at a nearby table. Their laughter rang hollow, and I could feel the underlying tension as they stole glances in my direction. I tried to focus on my art, but the weight of their stares made it nearly impossible. I glanced up occasionally, taking in snippets of their conversation. Did you hear about the last one? The man asked, his voice low and conspiratorial. The one who went missing? The woman replied, her tone mocking. Of course. They always go missing, don't they? A chill ran down my spine. It was as if they were speaking about me, about the very situation I found myself entangled in. My heart raced as I tried to focus, sketching absent-mindedly, while keeping an ear on their conversation. As minutes passed, the cafe filled with the hum of conversations and the sound of clinking cups. I felt increasingly exposed, acutely aware that I was being watched, not just by the patrons, but by something far darker lurking beneath the surface. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a rush of cool air swept through the cafe. I looked up, my heart leaping into my throat as Sam walked in. They scanned the room, their eyes locking onto mine with a reassuring nod. My tension eased slightly, knowing I had a friend nearby. As Sam took a seat at a table across from me, I felt a flicker of hope. We were in this together, and I needed to remind myself of that. I turned my focus back to my sketchbook, determined to gather as much information as possible before leaving. The group of patrons began to settle down, their laughter fading into hushed whispers. My stomach twisted as I strained to hear snippets of their conversation. "Don't you think it's time for another one?" a voice murmured, drawing my attention. "What if they find out?" another voice replied, laced with apprehension. "We need to be careful. The last time didn't go as planned." A feeling of dread settled heavily over me. What were they planning? Who were they talking about? My instincts screamed that something sinister was brewing, and I had to know more. I scribbled down my observations, desperate to piece together the fragments of their conversation. As I worked, a sudden movement caught my eye. The woman with the green scarf stood up, her gaze piercing through the crowd. I froze, my heart racing as she began to walk toward my table. "Hey there," she said, her voice dripping with feigned cheerfulness. "Mind if I join you?" Panic surged within me, and I glanced over at Sam, who remained calm, his gaze steady as he watched the encounter unfold. Sure," I replied hesitantly, trying to mask my fear. She took a seat across from me, her smile widening as she leaned in slightly. "I've seen you here a few times. You're quite the artist, aren't you?" "Just doodling," I said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Nothing serious. Don't sell yourself short," she said, her voice smooth but with an undercurrent of something darker. "You have talent. I think we could use someone like you." My heart raced at her words, an instinctual warning flaring to life. "Use me for what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Oh, just a little project," she replied, her smile still plastered on her face, but her eyes narrowing with intensity. "You see, we like to showcase unique talents in our little circle." Something in her tone sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt the urge to escape. "I really don't think I'm interested," I stammered, my voice faltering. "Don't be hasty," she warned, leaning in closer, her smile fading into something more sinister. "You wouldn't want to miss out on an opportunity like this." Before I could respond, I caught a glimpse of Sam, who was rising from his seat. The tension was palpable as he approached our table, his expression serious. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, his voice steady but low. The woman straightened, her demeanor shifting instantly. "Just having a chat," she replied, her tone abruptly cheerful. "Isn't that right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice as Sam locked eyes with me, a silent understanding passing between us. "Right," he said, his gaze narrowing at her. "But we should be going. Thanks for the chat." As we stood to leave, I felt the woman's gaze burning into my back, an unsettling sensation that left me shaken. Once we were outside, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "What just happened?" I asked, trying to piece together my jumbled thoughts. "She was probing," Sam said, his voice low. "They're watching you closely. We need to be careful." I nodded, feeling the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on me. "I didn't learn much," I admitted, frustration bubbling to the surface. "But you did," Sam countered, urgency creeping into their voice. "You learned that they're interested in you. We need to figure out their game before they make their next move." As we made our way back to my house, the reality of our situation began to settle in. The cafe was more than just a place. It was the heart of something much darker, and I was caught in the middle of it all. "Do you think they know about us?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see them lurking behind us. "I don't know," Sam replied, their tone contemplative. "But we have to assume they do. It's time to gather more intel and strategize." With renewed determination, I felt a sense of purpose take root within me. We would figure this out together, and whatever secrets lay ahead, I would face them head on. The night fell like a thick curtain, wrapping my neighborhood in darkness. My heart raced with a mix of anticipation and fear as I sat in my living room, waiting for Sam to arrive. The events at the cafe had rattled me, but I knew I had to act. If I was going to outsmart the people who had been watching me, I needed a plan, and Sam was the only one I trusted to help me navigate the growing chaos. I had set up a makeshift headquarters on my dining room table, littered with papers, sketches, and hastily scribbled notes about the strange group. The faint glow of a lamp illuminated the chaos, casting long shadows that danced on the walls, reflecting the turmoil in my mind. Each piece of information I'd gathered felt like a clue in a puzzle I was desperate to solve. As the clock ticked closer to the hour we agreed upon, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. My phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a text from Sam. "I'm outside." I opened the door, and Sam stepped in, looking serious but composed. "You ready?" they asked, their voice low as they glanced around, ensuring no one had followed them. "Let's get to it," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. We settled at the table, and I gestured to the scattered papers. "Here's what I've pieced together." I explained everything I had overheard at the cafe, recounting the woman's unnerving conversation and her strange invitation. Sam listened intently, their brow furrowing as they processed the information. "This is bad," Sam said finally, their tone heavy. "They're not just watching you. They're planning something, and you're at the center of it. What do you think their goal is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Sam admitted, leaning back in their chair. "But it can't be good. We need to find out more about them, figure out who they are and what they want." I nodded, determined. I could try to get closer to them. Maybe I can find out more at the cafe. Sam's expression shifted, their eyes narrowing. "That's risky. They already have their eyes on you. What if they catch on? We need to think bigger." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. "So what do you suggest? Just sit here and wait for them to make a move?" Sam took a deep breath, a contemplative look crossing their face. "Actually, I have an idea. I've been doing some digging on social media. There are forums and groups that discuss unsolved cases, some of which are linked to your cafe crowd. If we can infiltrate one of those discussions, we might get leads on who they are." My heart raced at the thought. "You think they're involved in those cases?" "I'm sure of it," Sam replied. "But we need to be careful. If they catch wind of us snooping around, it could put us in serious danger." We spent the next few hours strategizing, going through my sketches, noting down key details, and mapping out our next steps. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, each piece of the puzzle falling into place. Finally, we decided to take a break, and I brewed us some tea. As we sipped, the tension in the air lessened slightly, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. "Thanks for doing this," I said, breaking the silence. "I don't think I could handle this alone." Sam smiled. "You're not alone. We'll get through this together." Just then, a noise interrupted our moment of calm. A faint tapping sound coming from the window. My heart dropped as I turned to look. The curtains fluttered slightly, and the darkness outside seemed to shift ominously. "What was that?" Sam asked, instinctively moving closer. "I don't know," I whispered, my pulse quickening again. I approached the window cautiously, parting the curtains just enough to peek outside. The street was empty, bathed in shadows under the dim glow of the street lamp. I exhaled, feeling foolish for being so paranoid, but something about the feeling of being watched clung to me like a second skin. "Probably just the wind," I murmured, trying to reassure myself. But as I turned back to Sam, their expression was grave. "What if they know we're onto them?" they said quietly. I swallowed hard, the weight of that possibility settling heavily on my shoulders. "Then we need to move quickly. We can't let them get the upper hand." We returned to our notes, but the atmosphere had shifted. The earlier confidence I felt began to wane, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. The deeper we dug, the more perilous our situation seemed. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again, this time with a notification that made my stomach drop. It was a message from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing. Stop digging or else." My heart raced as I stared at the screen, panic surging through me. "What is it?" Sam asked, leaning over to read the message. Their face paled. "We need to go. Now." I nodded, adrenaline flooding my veins as we quickly gathered our things. The stakes had just escalated, and I realized that we were in deeper than I had ever anticipated. As we slipped out of the house into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The darkness seemed to close in around us, the weight of unseen eyes trailing our every step. The cool night air enveloped us as we stepped outside, a stark contrast to the tension radiating from within the house. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound felt amplified in the silence, heightening my senses. Sam and I moved cautiously, our footsteps muffled against the pavement, as if we were trying to evade whatever eyes might be lurking in the shadows. "Where to?" Sam whispered, glancing around as if expecting someone to leap from the darkness. "We need to find a place where we can talk without worrying about being overheard," I replied, my mind racing through possibilities. "Maybe the park?" "Too open. They could be watching from anywhere," Sam said, shaking their head. "What about your old hideout in the woods?" My heart sank at the mention of the woods. It was a place from my childhood, a haven of sorts, but now it felt ominous. "I haven't been there in years," I said hesitantly. "We don't have a choice. It's secluded, and we'll have some cover," Sam insisted, urgency creeping into their voice. Reluctantly, I nodded. I had to trust Sam. They were right about the urgency of the situation. We made our way to the edge of the woods, the trees looming like silent sentinels. As we entered the dimly lit forest, the sound of our footsteps was swallowed by the underbrush, and a heavy silence settled around us. Once we reached the small clearing I remembered, I turned to Sam. "This is it," I said, my voice low. "Let's sit down and figure out our next move." We settled on the damp ground, the scent of earth and pine filling the air. I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing softly in the darkness. "We need to check that message again," I said, my fingers trembling slightly as I tapped it open. The words stared back at me, cold and threatening. "I know what you're doing. Stop digging or else." "What do you think they mean by or else?" Sam asked, their eyes narrowing in concern. "I don't know, but it sounds serious," I replied, anxiety knotting in my stomach. "Maybe they're trying to intimidate us, scare us into backing off. Or they could be warning us," Sam said, their voice low. "If they're watching you, they might know we're here now." I shivered at the thought, glancing around the clearing as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "We can't let them intimidate us. We have to keep pushing forward," I insisted, trying to maintain a semblance of courage. "Okay, but what's our next step?" Sam prompted, leaning in. "Do we report this to the police?" I hesitated, contemplating the idea. What would we even say? "Hey, we've received a threatening message from someone we don't know. They'd think we're crazy. Then we need to find out who this person is," Sam suggested, their eyes brightening with determination. "If we can gather more evidence, maybe we can connect the dots." "Right?" I agreed. "We need to return to the cafe, maybe observe the crowd more closely. If anyone is connected to those cold cases, we might be able to find a clue." As we brainstormed ideas, the atmosphere shifted. The woods felt alive, every sound magnified. The rustle of leaves suddenly seemed louder, and the wind whispered through the branches, a haunting reminder of how isolated we were. "Did you hear that?" Sam said, tensing up. I nodded, holding my breath. It sounded like footsteps. The noise grew louder, crunching leaves and snapping twigs echoing ominously in the stillness. My heart raced as I turned, squinting into the darkness, trying to discern shapes among the trees. "Let's get out of here," Sam whispered urgently, grabbing my arm. "Wait," I said, feeling the weight of my fear. "We need to see who it is. Are you insane? We could be walking right into their trap." Sam's eyes were wide with alarm. Before I could respond, a figure stepped into the clearing, a tall shadow, partially obscured by the trees. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively moved closer to Sam. The figure remained still, just outside the reach of the moonlight. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Silence. Then, the figure took a step forward, revealing a familiar face. "Lila," I gasped, recognizing my childhood friend. "What are you doing here?" Lila looked just as startled as I was. "I came to check on you. I saw the news about those strange disappearances and I felt like something was wrong." Sam exhaled in relief. "Thank God it's just you." Lila frowned, glancing around as if sensing the tension in the air. "What's going on?" I hesitated, torn between wanting to keep Lila safe and the need to share the truth. Finally, I said, I've been getting strange messages, and I think someone's watching me. We were just discussing it. Her expression shifted to concern. That's not good. You have to be careful. Are you okay? I'm trying to be, I said, my voice faltering. But I need help. If you're here, maybe you can help us figure this out. Lila nodded, her determination matching mine. Of course. Just tell me what you need. As I started to explain the situation, my phone buzzed again, interrupting our conversation. I glanced at the screen, my heart sinking as I read another message from the unknown number. You shouldn't have come here. Oh, Sam said, anxiety flashing across their face. This isn't good. Lila's eyes widened. What does that mean? Are they here? I looked around frantically, fear twisting in my gut. We need to leave. Now. Without waiting for another word, we bolted from the clearing, adrenaline propelling us forward as we raced through the woods. The darkness closed in around us, the shadows feeling more like a living entity than ever before. I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted, every snap of a twig echoing the heartbeat in my ears. We need to get to my car, I panted, glancing over my shoulder as we emerged from the trees. Do you think they saw us? Lila asked, her voice laced with panic. I don't know, but we can't take any chances, I replied, my mind racing with the possibilities of what could happen next. As we reached the car, I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking as I tried to insert them into the lock. Come on, I muttered under my breath, the night air feeling heavy with impending doom. Finally, the door clicked open, and we jumped inside, locking the doors immediately. I took a moment to catch my breath, the adrenaline still coursing through me. What now? Sam asked, glancing at the trees, half expecting something to emerge. We drive to the police station, I said, determination solidifying in my chest. If we can show them the messages and tell them everything, they might take us seriously. Okay, Lila agreed, her voice steadying. Let's go. As I started the car, the engine roared to life, and I peeled away from the curb, my heart racing. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, a chill shot through me. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, watching us with an unsettling intensity, their face obscured by shadows. Did you see that? I gasped, my grip tightening on the wheel. What? Sam asked, eyes darting to the back. Someone's there, I exclaimed, panic flooding my senses. I pressed down on the accelerator, the car lurching forward, but the image of the figure lingered in my mind. Those eyes piercing through the darkness, a reminder that the danger was far from over. As we drove away, the gravity of our situation settled heavily upon us. We were being hunted, and the only question that remained was how long we could evade our pursuers before they caught up with us. The drive to the police station felt like a blur, the scenery flashing past us in a haze of dark colors and distant streetlights. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white with tension, as my mind raced through the events that had unfolded. I couldn't shake the image of the figure standing in the woods, their presence looming ominously over us. Are you okay? Lila asked, her voice breaking through my thoughts. I nodded, forcing a shaky breath, just trying to wrap my head around all of this. I can't believe someone's watching me. Sam shifted in the passenger seat, glancing at me. We'll figure it out. Once we talk to the police, they'll take us seriously. They'll know what to do. I hope so, I replied, doubt gnawing at me. But what if they don't believe us? This is all so surreal. Lila reached over and squeezed my arm, offering reassurance. We have evidence. The messages, the strange figure. We just need to present everything clearly. They can't ignore that. As we approached the police station, the fluorescent lights illuminated the building, casting an almost sterile glow over the entrance. I parked the car, taking a moment to gather my thoughts before stepping out. Stay close, I instructed, and we moved as a tight unit toward the entrance. The air felt charged with anticipation, every step echoing my unease. Inside, the station was bustling with activity, officers moving about, phones ringing, and the faint murmur of conversations blending into a low hum. I approached the reception desk, my heart pounding as I met the gaze of the officer on duty. Can I help you? she asked, her expression professional yet curious. I took a deep breath, summoning the courage to speak. We need to report a threatening message and some strange occurrences. I think someone's been watching me. Okay, have a seat, and I'll get an officer to speak with you, she said, motioning to a row of chairs against the wall. As we sat down, I glanced around the station, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, the paranoia creeping back in. I was sure that figure in the woods hadn't just been a figment of my imagination. Minutes passed, and I fidgeted in my seat, the tension palpable. I could feel Lila and Sam's anxiety as well, their eyes darting around the room, looking for potential threats. Finally, an officer approached us, a tall man in a crisp uniform, his expression serious. "Hello, I'm Officer Daniels. What seems to be the problem?" he asked, glancing at each of us. We received a threatening message," I stammered, pulling out my phone. "And I think someone's been watching me for a while now." Officer Daniels raised an eyebrow. "All right, can I see the message?" I handed him my phone, my heart racing as he read the words that had sent me spiraling into fear. His brow furrowed as he finished, and he handed the phone back to me. "This is serious," he said, his tone shifting. "Do you have any idea who might be behind this?" "I don't know," I replied, frustration creeping into my voice. "But I saw someone in the woods just before we came here. They were standing there, watching us." Officer Daniels nodded, jotting down notes. "We'll need to look into this immediately. Is there anyone you've had conflicts with recently? Anyone who might want to harm you?" I shook my head. "No one I can think of. This all started when I found those strange notes at my house." "Notes?" he asked, his interest piqued. I glanced at Lila and Sam, both of them nodding in encouragement. "Yes, I've been receiving notes that reference cold cases, and now I'm getting these messages telling me to stop digging." Officer Daniels' expression hardened. "Cold cases can be sensitive. It's possible someone is trying to intimidate you into stopping your investigation." "I wasn't even investigating. I just happened to notice a few things that seemed odd," I protested, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Regardless, you've put yourself in a dangerous position," he said. "We need to take this seriously. For your safety, we'll increase patrols around your home and the area." "Thank you," I said, relief flooding through me. "But what if they come after me anyway?" "That's why we'll need to keep you safe," he replied. "For now, I suggest you stay with someone until we can figure this out." "Can you do that?" I glanced at Lila and Sam, both nodding in agreement. "Yes, I can stay with them." "Good. I'll have an officer escort you back to your home to collect any other evidence you might have, and then we'll take you to a safer location until we can sort this out," Officer Daniels said, motioning for another officer to join us. As we stood up to leave, a sense of urgency surged within me. This wasn't just about me anymore. I needed to protect my friends as well. "Wait," I said, turning back to Officer Daniels. "Can you check if anyone else has reported seeing that figure? I have a feeling this is more connected than we realize." He nodded, taking my request seriously. "I'll have the detectives look into it. If there's anything else you remember, don't hesitate to reach out." With that, we were escorted out of the station, my heart pounding as we stepped back into the night. The air felt heavy with dread, the reality of our situation settling in. "What do we do now?" Sam asked, glancing around nervously. "We gather evidence and stay alert," I replied, determination fueling my voice. "We need to figure out who's behind this and why." As we drove back to my house, a sense of dread gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the stranger from the woods had followed us. I needed to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows, to uncover the truth behind the fear that had taken over my life. The drive back to my house felt suffocating, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on me. My mind was a swirling mass of anxiety and uncertainty, each turn of the road amplifying my fears. Lila sat beside me, her expression tense but determined, while Sam's fingers drummed nervously on his knee in the back seat. As we pulled into the driveway, the familiar outline of my home loomed before us, but it felt foreign now, like a sinister shell of what it once was. The comforting walls that had shielded me from the outside world now felt like a prison, harboring secrets and unseen threats. I parked the car and glanced at Lila and Sam. "Are you both ready?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They nodded, though I could see the flicker of fear in their eyes. Together, we stepped out into the cool night air, the silence around us amplified by the pounding of my heart. I led the way up to the front door, glancing around as if expecting someone to leap out from the shadows. Inside, the house felt eerily quiet. The usual creaks and groans of the structure seemed amplified, echoing through the stillness. I turned on the lights, illuminating the living room, but the brightness did little to dispel the darkness that hung over me. Okay, let's gather anything that could be useful, I said, forcing myself to stay focused. We need to look for any other notes or signs that someone's been here. We split up, each of us searching different rooms. I headed to my bedroom, scanning the walls and furniture for anything unusual. My heart raced as I rifled through my drawers, searching for the notes I had stashed away. The fear of being watched gripped me tighter, and I couldn't shake the sensation that eyes were on me, even in the confines of my own room. In the corner of my closet, I noticed a flicker of movement, a shadow darting just out of sight. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. "Did you see that?" I called out, my voice trembling. Lila and Sam rushed into the room, concern etched on their faces. "What is it?" Lila asked, her eyes wide. I think I saw something," I stammered, stepping cautiously toward the closet. In here, with a deep breath, I flung the closet door open. The space was empty, but the shadows seemed to dance menacingly in the corner. I scanned the floor, finding nothing but dust bunnies and an old pair of shoes. "Nothing here," I murmured, disappointment settling over me. "Maybe it was just your imagination," Sam suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Yeah, or it could be a sign that someone's been in here," Lila added, glancing nervously around the room. "We need to hurry," I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm. "Right? Let's check the rest of the house." As we searched, we gathered any papers or items that could provide clues about the mysterious figure in the notes. Each creak of the floorboards made my heart race, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, whether by the figure outside or by someone who had already been inside my home. Finally, we regrouped in the living room, our arms full of notes and other suspicious items. I laid everything out on the coffee table, a jumble of papers and remnants of my frantic search. "Okay, let's see what we have," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's got to be something in here that connects to what's been happening." We began sifting through the items, scraps of paper with hastily scrawled notes, receipts from odd places, and even a few discarded envelopes. The tension in the room thickened as we pieced together the fragments of a puzzle that seemed increasingly sinister. Then, I stumbled upon an old photograph wedged between two receipts. I pulled it out, my heart racing as I examined it. It was a picture of me as a child, standing in front of my house, but the background looked different. The trees were taller, the sky a deep shade of gray, and in the corner of the photo, I noticed a figure partially obscured by shadows. "Guys, look at this," I exclaimed, holding the photograph up for them to see. Lila leaned in closer, her brows furrowing. "Who is that?" she asked, pointing to the shadowy figure. "I don't know," I replied, a chill creeping down my spine. "But it looks like someone was there with me, watching me." As we examined the photo further, a loud thud echoed from the back of the house, causing us to jump. We exchanged terrified glances, our instincts kicking in. "What was that?" Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. "Stay here," I instructed, gripping a nearby lamp as a makeshift weapon. I moved cautiously toward the back of the house, the thudding sound echoing in my mind. The hallway felt long and foreboding, each step heavy with dread. I peered into the kitchen, but it was empty. Just as I was about to turn back, the sound came again, this time louder and closer. I took a deep breath and pushed open the back door, the hinges creaking ominously. The backyard was dimly lit by the faint glow of the moon, and for a moment, everything felt eerily still. But then, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the trees, a figure darting away from the house. "Hey!" I shouted, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I rushed into the yard. "Stop!" But the figure was already disappearing into the forest, their form blending with the shadows. I hesitated, torn between pursuing them and retreating back to safety. "Be careful," Lila called out from behind me, her voice laced with fear. "I need to see who it is," I yelled back, my feet moving before I could think. The crunch of leaves underfoot filled the silence as I dashed toward the tree line, my heart racing. The shadows swallowed me whole as I plunged into the darkened woods, every instinct screaming for me to turn back. But I couldn't. Not now. The forest swallowed me in its embrace, the moonlight struggling to pierce the thick canopy above. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in the stillness of the night. I strained to hear any sound, any indication of where the figure might have gone. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the soft crunch of twigs beneath my feet. "Where are you?" I whispered into the darkness, the words barely escaping my lips. My breath came in quick bursts, fear and determination propelling me forward. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn deeper into a trap. Suddenly, a soft rustle broke the silence. I froze, my pulse quickening. "Hello," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is anyone there?" No answer, just the whispering of the wind through the branches, taunting me with its eerie echo. I took a cautious step forward, peering into the underbrush. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement to my right, followed by the shadow of a figure darting between the trees. My instincts kicked in, and I chased after them, propelled by a mix of adrenaline and fear. "Stop," I shouted, my voice rising in urgency. "I just want to talk." The figure paused momentarily, just long enough for me to catch a glimpse of their face. A pale, gaunt expression framed by dark hair. A shiver ran down my spine as I recognized the unmistakable features. It was the person from my dreams, the one who had haunted my nights. Before I could fully comprehend the realization, the figure turned and bolted deeper into the woods, leaving me breathless and confused. I sprinted after them, branches scratching at my skin, the world around me blurring into a frantic haze of darkness and panic. "Why are you doing this?" I called out, desperation creeping into my voice. "What do you want from me?" But the figure didn't stop. Instead, they led me deeper into the forest until I reached a small clearing, illuminated by the silver glow of the moon. The air was thick with tension, and I felt as if I had stepped into another realm, a place where reality blurred with nightmares. Just as I thought I had lost them, the figure suddenly turned to face me, their eyes gleaming in the dark. I staggered back, breathless, my heart racing at the sight. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are you watching me?" The figure took a step forward, and I instinctively took a step back, the fear pooling in my stomach. "You don't remember me, do you?" they said, their voice low and haunting, echoing in the stillness of the night. "Remember you?" I echoed, confusion flooding my mind. "No, I don't know you. Why are you doing this?" They stepped closer, and I could see the pain etched on their face. "Because you need to remember, before it's too late." I shook my head, panic rising. "Remember what? What do you want from me?" "You have to remember what happened," they insisted, their voice rising in intensity. "The night it all began. You can't keep running from it." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "What happened that night?" I pressed, desperation lacing my words. "What are you talking about?" The figure hesitated, their gaze softening for a moment. "You were there, in the forest with me, but you left. You need to remember, or they will come for you. They're already here." My mind raced, trying to piece together fragmented memories, but the more I tried, the more elusive the truth became. I felt like I was standing on the precipice of a vast abyss, teetering on the edge of understanding, but unable to grasp what lay below. Suddenly, a low growl emanated from the trees behind me, breaking the tension in the air. The figure's eyes widened with fear. "You need to go," they urged, their voice urgent. "They're coming." Before I could react, the figure turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving me standing alone in the clearing, panic surging through me like a tidal wave. I heard the growling intensify, echoing in the darkness around me. I spun around, my heart racing, searching for an escape. The growling grew louder, more menacing, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Something was lurking in the shadows, watching me, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted back toward the direction I had come, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I navigated through the thick underbrush, adrenaline propelling me forward. I burst out of the forest and back into the familiar terrain of my backyard, heart pounding in my chest. I glanced back, half expecting to see whatever creature had chased me, but the darkness behind me remained still and silent. I stumbled into the safety of my house, slamming the door shut behind me. The familiar surroundings felt like a sanctuary, but the adrenaline still coursed through my veins, the memory of the figure haunting my thoughts. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, and slid down to the floor. Lila and Sam rushed into the room, their expressions a mix of concern and fear. "What happened?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "We heard growling. Are you okay?" I nodded, though I could still feel the adrenaline pulsing through my body. "I saw them," I managed to say, my voice shaky. "The person from my dreams. They were there in the woods." "What do you mean?" Sam pressed, his brow furrowed. "What do they want?" "They wanted me to remember," I said, trying to catch my breath. "They said I was there with them, that I need to remember what happened." Lila exchanged a worried glance with Sam, the gravity of my words hanging heavy in the air. "We need to figure this out," she said firmly, determination replacing fear in her eyes. "We can't let whatever this is control us, right?" I agreed, trying to shake off the lingering terror. "We need to find out what happened that night, and we need to do it fast." The shadows of the forest felt closer now, as if they were encroaching on the safety of my home. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the journey ahead, the truth waiting just out of reach. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. The night was strangely quiet, a calmness that felt almost deafening, hanging in the air like an unspoken promise. Shadows danced around the houses at the end of the street, where the wind whispered secrets only the most attentive could decipher. For Avery Sinclair, a young artist seeking inspiration, this tranquility was merely an invitation to boredom. Having recently moved to the quaint neighborhood, she felt out of place. What should have been a fresh start was, in fact, a series of monotonous days filled with solitude and an ever-growing longing for something exciting to break the routine. At the heart of her new existence stood an old, abandoned house, shrouded in layers of mystery. Its broken windows resembled hollow eyes, while the peeling paint told tales of a time long past. The neighborhood buzzed with stories about the place, whispers that it was cursed, that the previous inhabitants had vanished without a trace, leaving nothing but echoes of their existence. Avery, with her curious spirit and artistic sensibilities, often found herself gazing at the house, caught between fascination and dread. One fateful night, as stars twinkled like distant diamonds above the city, Avery sat in her makeshift studio, a cramped room upstairs in her new home. Dimly lit by a single lamp, the space was cluttered with canvases and paintbrushes, each telling a story of her creative journey. She was deeply immersed in her latest painting, an abstract piece that reflected her tumultuous emotions, when suddenly, a sharp sound shattered the silence. A scream, an unearthly scream that seemed to seep through the walls and reach her ears, echoing in her mind. Avery froze, the brush hovering in the air, her heart pounding violently against her ribcage. Was it her imagination playing tricks on her, or was there truly something sinister lurking in the shadows of the abandoned house next door? The scream pierced through her thoughts, igniting a flicker of determination within her. She could not ignore it. She needed to investigate. Curiosity gnawed at her, pulling her closer like a moth to a flame, despite the foreboding sense of danger. With a heavy coat draped over her shoulders to shield her from the chill of the night, Avery stepped outside. The air was crisp, tinged with the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and her footsteps echoed on the empty sidewalk, a solitary rhythm against the backdrop of night. As she approached the looming structure of the abandoned house, an unsettling sensation washed over her, a mixture of excitement and dread. The darkness around it seemed thicker, as if it held its breath, waiting for her to make a move. She paused at the front gate, which creaked open with the slightest push, a sound that resonated like a warning bell in the stillness. The door was ajar, inviting her in, or perhaps warning her to stay out. Avery hesitated, her heart racing in her chest. The allure of the unknown pulled her closer, and the thought of being the only one to hear those haunting screams pushed her forward. With a deep breath, she crossed the threshold into the house. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Dust motes floated in the dim light, giving the space an otherworldly glow. Avery's footsteps echoed in the empty rooms, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her felt like a whisper of the past, and the walls seemed to pulse with memories of long-forgotten lives. As she ventured deeper into the house, the screams grew louder, more frantic, reverberating through her bones. They were agonizing, filled with desperation, as if someone were calling for help. Avery's mind raced, torn between fear and a compelling need to uncover the truth behind the sounds. What could possibly be happening in this forsaken place? Was someone truly in danger, or was it merely a figment of her imagination? The house revealed itself in fragments, furniture draped in white sheets, remnants of a life once lived. A chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, its crystals covered in layers of dust. She entered a living room, where an old fireplace stood cold and empty, its mantel adorned with fading photographs of a family that had once filled the space with laughter and warmth. Avery felt an ache in her heart. It was a stark contrast to the chilling screams that echoed in her ears. Then, something caught her eye, a flickering light coming from the back of the house. Avery's curiosity ignited, and she followed the glow down a narrow hallway, the walls adorned with peeling wallpaper that whispered of better days. The screams intensified, now a chorus of panic that sent shivers down her spine. She felt as though she were walking into a nightmare, and yet she pressed on, unable to turn back. Finally, she reached a doorway at the end of the hallway. The light pulsed from within, and as she stepped closer, she could see that it was a room left in disarray. An overturned chair, books scattered across the floor, and a single lamp flickering on a small table. But what truly captured her attention was the window, where the curtain moved slightly, as if someone were attempting to conceal themselves from view. Avery's heart raced, a mix of fear and determination surging through her veins. What was happening inside that room? She took a deep breath, summoning her courage. Avery had to know what was going on. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges sounding like a cry for help. The scene before her unfolded in slow motion. The room was empty, but the atmosphere was charged with an electric tension. The flickering lamp cast eerie shadows that danced along the walls, and the screams had faded into silence, leaving only an unsettling stillness in their wake. Avery stepped inside, her senses heightened, scanning the room for any signs of life. Her heart raced as she called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Her voice echoed in the silence, swallowed by the oppressive air. As she moved deeper into the room, she felt a chilling sensation, as if someone were watching her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. Suddenly, a noise erupted from the corner, and Avery turned sharply, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a rustling sound, followed by a soft whimper. Avery's breath caught in her throat as she took a cautious step toward the source of the sound. The tension in the air was palpable, and she could feel her heart racing faster with each step. As she neared the corner, she could make out a figure curled up on the floor, trembling and clearly terrified. "Who are you?" Avery asked, her voice trembling slightly as she crouched down to get a better look. The figure slowly turned, revealing wide, terrified eyes that glimmered with fear. It was a young girl, no older than 10, with disheveled hair and dirt-smudged cheeks. Avery's heart broke at the sight. "Please," the girl whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "You have to help me. They're coming back." Avery's mind raced, the urgency of the situation crashing over her like a wave. Who were they? What had happened here? The girl's frightened gaze locked onto Avery's, and in that moment, the world outside faded away. The mystery of the abandoned house had just deepened, and Avery knew she was about to uncover secrets that would change everything. Avery's heart raced as she knelt beside the girl, her instincts kicking in as a flood of concern washed over her. The child's eyes were wide, shimmering with unshed tears, and her hands trembled as she clutched a small, tattered teddy bear to her chest. Avery reached out, gently touching the girl's shoulder, her mind racing to process the chaotic situation unfolding before her. "Don't be afraid," Avery said softly, trying to project calmness. "I'm here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" "Lila," the girl whispered, her voice trembling as she met Avery's gaze. "Please, we need to hide. They'll hear us." Avery's heart sank at the urgency in Lila's voice. She quickly scanned the room, searching for a safe place to conceal them. The abandoned house, despite its dilapidated state, had pockets of darkness that could provide cover. The flickering lamp cast eerie shadows that danced across the walls, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Avery's instincts urged her to protect this vulnerable child at all costs. "Where should we hide?" Avery asked, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Under the bed," Lila replied, her eyes darting toward the nearby bed, its frame dusty and sagging under the weight of neglect. Avery nodded, and together they scrambled to the edge of the bed. The air felt electric, charged with the tension of impending danger. As they crouched down, Lila's grip on her teddy bear tightened, her breath quickening as if she could sense an unseen threat looming. Avery held her breath, straining to listen for any signs of movement outside the room. The silence was suffocating, interrupted only by the sound of their own heartbeats echoing in their ears. Minutes felt like hours as they huddled in the cramped space beneath the bed, shrouded in darkness. Avery's mind raced, piecing together fragments of information. Who were they? What had happened to Lila? The scream she had heard earlier echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the terror that lurked within the walls of the abandoned house. Suddenly, Avery heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and closing in fast. Her heart pounded louder, the rhythmic thumping drowning out all rational thought. She felt Lila tremble beside her, the child's fear palpable in the confined space. Avery squeezed Lila's shoulder, trying to communicate reassurance even as her own anxiety surged. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Avery held her breath, a knot forming in her stomach. The door creaked open slowly, and the dim light from the hallway spilled into the room. A shadow fell across the floor, and Avery strained to catch a glimpse of whoever, or whatever, was intruding. "What a mess," a deep voice muttered, laced with contempt. "I told you to clean this place up. You think you can hide from me? I'll find you." Avery's breath caught in her throat, and Lila's small frame quaked next to her. She strained to see the figure standing in the doorway. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by shadows. He seemed to be scanning the room, his gaze sharp and predatory. Avery's heart raced as he stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. Come out, wherever you are," he taunted, his voice dripping with malice. The word sent a chill down Avery's spine. The man was playing a cruel game, and the danger was all too real. She clenched her fists, fighting the urge to spring from their hiding spot and confront him. But she knew that any sudden movement could give them away. "Stay quiet," she whispered urgently to Lila, who nodded silently, her eyes wide with fear. The man began to rummage through the room, tossing furniture aside as if searching for something, or someone. Avery's mind raced with panic as she considered their options. They had to get out of there. But how? The man's presence felt suffocating, like a dark cloud threatening to swallow them whole. Just then, a sound echoed from the other side of the house. A loud crash, followed by a faint cry. The man froze, his expression shifting from annoyance to intrigue. He turned abruptly, striding toward the noise with an intensity that made Avery's blood run cold. Avery seized the moment. "We need to go now," she whispered urgently to Lila, her heart pounding with the urgency of their situation. They crawled out from beneath the bed, Avery glancing around to ensure the man was distracted. The coast was clear for now, but she knew they couldn't linger. They needed a plan. "Follow me," Avery instructed quietly as they moved toward the doorway. She led Lila through the room, her senses heightened every sound amplified in the tense atmosphere. The faint cries from the other side of the house echoed like a siren, pulling at her curiosity even as fear clawed at her heart. As they crept down the hallway, Avery could hear the man's footsteps retreating into the distance. The house felt alive, its creaks and groans resonating like whispers from a forgotten past. Each step was a delicate dance between stealth and urgency as they navigated through the darkened corridors. "Where are we going?" Lila whispered, her voice barely audible. "Anywhere but here," Avery replied, her mind racing. She needed to find a way out, a safe haven where they could regroup and formulate a plan. They slipped through a doorway into a small kitchen, the remnants of a life once lived scattered around them. Dusty dishes, an old stove, and a table that seemed frozen in time. Avery searched for an exit, her heart pounding in her chest. The back door loomed at the far end of the kitchen, a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. She hurried toward it, glancing back to ensure Lila was close behind. "Stay quiet," she urged, her voice low as they reached the door. Avery's fingers trembled as she grasped the handle, praying it wasn't locked. With a soft turn, the door creaked open, revealing a dark backyard overgrown with weeds and shadows. The moonlight spilled onto the ground, illuminating a narrow path that led toward the woods beyond. "Come on," Avery whispered urgently, her heart racing as they slipped outside. The night air was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside the house. They darted across the yard, moving silently as they made their way toward the edge of the forest, the trees standing tall like guardians watching over them. Just as they reached the tree line, a voice echoed from behind them. "You think you can escape? You can't hide from me forever." Avery's heart dropped, and she felt Lila's small hand grip hers tightly. Panic surged through her, but she pushed it down, focusing on the path ahead. They needed to get deep into the woods, away from the man's reach. "Run," Avery commanded, and they plunged into the darkness of the forest, branches snagging at their clothes as they navigated through the underbrush. The sounds of the night surrounded them, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the pounding of their own hearts. As they ran deeper into the woods, Avery's mind whirled with questions. Who was the man? What had happened to Lila? The weight of their situation pressed down on her, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it now. They needed to find safety, and quickly. After what felt like an eternity, they finally slowed, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Avery leaned against a tree, heart racing, and looked at Lila. The girl was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but there was a spark of determination flickering within them. "We can't go back," Lila said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "We have to keep moving." Avery nodded, her resolve strengthening. "You're right. We need to find a safe place to hide and figure out what to do next." They pressed on, weaving through the trees, determined to put as much distance between themselves and the abandoned house as possible. The forest felt like a labyrinth, with twisting paths and shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. But the fear of the man pursuing them drove them forward. After a while, they stumbled upon a small clearing, moonlight spilling onto the forest floor. Avery glanced around, her instincts on high alert. It was quiet here, but the sense of vulnerability lingered in the air. They needed to stay vigilant. "Let's rest for a moment," Avery suggested, guiding Lila to a fallen log where they could catch their breath. She was keenly aware that they were still in danger, but exhaustion was creeping in, and they needed to regroup. "Do you think he'll find us?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her gaze darting around the clearing. "I don't know," Avery admitted, trying to keep her own fear at bay. "But we'll do everything we can to stay hidden. Just remember, you're not alone. We'll get through this." Lila nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I know," Avery replied, reaching out to squeeze Lila's hand reassuringly. "But we'll figure this out together. You're brave, Lila. We'll find a way to keep you safe." As they sat in the moonlit clearing, Avery couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The silence felt heavy, as if the forest itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. She scanned the darkness, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them. Just then, A rustle in the bushes nearby sent a jolt of adrenaline through Avery. She turned sharply, eyes wide, heart racing as the sound grew closer. They weren't alone. "Get behind me," Avery whispered urgently, pushing Lila back as she prepared to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows. The underbrush parted, and out stepped a figure, a young boy, disheveled and wide-eyed, appearing as frightened as they were. "Please, help me," he cried, glancing back toward the darkness from which he emerged. Avery's heart raced, her instincts on high alert. "Who are you?" she demanded, assessing the newcomer with caution. "I'm Jamie. I was hiding in the woods," the boy explained, panting. "I saw him too. He's dangerous. We have to get away." Avery exchanged a glance with Lila, who clutched her teddy bear tightly, fear etched on her face. They were in this together, and now they had another ally. "All right, Jamie," Avery said, her voice steady but urgent. "We need to stick together. Do you know a safe place we can go? There's an old cabin deeper in the woods." "It might be empty," Jamie replied, his eyes wide with desperation. "I think it's far enough away from him." "Lead the way," Avery urged, determination igniting within her. They couldn't waste any time. They needed to reach that cabin and formulate a plan. As Jamie led them through the trees, Avery felt a sense of solidarity forming between the three of them. They were all lost in their own way, bound together by the threat of danger. Each step took them further from the abandoned house and the horrors they had faced. But the forest was thick and dark, the shadows creeping closer as the night deepened. The path twisted and turned, and Avery's senses heightened, ever wary of the dangers that lurked just beyond the reach of the moonlight. The three of them moved swiftly, adrenaline pushing them forward, but the feeling of being pursued never left. The cabin was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place to regroup and gather their thoughts. But in that moment, all they could do was run, driven by the instinct to survive. The forest closed in around them, whispering secrets of the past and threats of the unknown. As they pressed on, the woods began to feel alive, the rustling leaves and snapping twigs creating a symphony of unease. The sense of urgency spurred them, but uncertainty loomed like a shadow. They had to reach the cabin before it was too late. "Are we almost there?" Lila asked, her voice shaky as they pushed deeper into the forest. "Just a little further," Jamie replied, glancing back over his shoulder, fear etched on his features. Avery's heart raced as they continued, the anticipation building. The night felt charged, electric with the promise of danger. They needed to find safety, to escape the malevolent presence that haunted their steps. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing, and there it stood, the old cabin, weathered and forgotten, yet offering a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. Avery's heart lifted, a sense of relief washing over her. This could be their refuge. "Quick inside," she urged, guiding Lila and Jamie toward the door. The three of them rushed in, the old wood creaking under their weight as they stepped into the dim interior. The cabin was dusty and filled with the scent of decay, remnants of a past life lingering in the air. A single window cast pale moonlight into the room, illuminating a table and a few scattered chairs. It wasn't much, but it felt safer than the wilderness outside. Avery quickly locked the door behind them, her heart pounding as she leaned against it, catching her breath. "We're safe for now," she murmured, scanning the room for any signs of danger. "What do we do now?" Jamie asked, his voice trembling. "First, we catch our breath," Avery replied, trying to project calmness despite the chaos swirling in her mind. "Then we come up with a plan." As they settled into the cabin, Avery couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal was far from over. The night held too many secrets, and the man was still out there, lurking in the shadows. They had found temporary refuge, but danger was still lurking just beyond the door. "Can we trust each other?" Lila asked, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Avery looked at the two children, her heart swelling with determination. "We have to trust each other," she said firmly. "Together, we can find a way out of this." As they huddled together in the cabin, the darkness outside seemed to thicken, the night pressing in like a weight. Avery knew they had to stay vigilant, to keep their eyes open for any signs of danger. The man was still out there, and they needed to be prepared for whatever came next. "Let's take turns keeping watch," she suggested, glancing at Jamie and Lila. "We'll keep each other safe." They nodded, determination flickering in their eyes. Together, they would face whatever came next. Avery could feel the weight of the night pressing down on them, but she also felt a glimmer of hope. They were alive, together, and that was all that mattered. As the hours passed, Avery took her place by the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the pulse of the night surrounding them, the world outside shrouded in mystery and fear. But within the walls of the cabin, they had each other, and that was enough to keep the darkness at bay. The night stretched on, the shadows outside deepening with every passing hour. Avery kept her watch by the window, peering into the dense darkness that surrounded the cabin. The rustling of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures were the only sounds breaking the heavy silence. Jamie and Lila sat huddled together, whispering softly as they tried to keep the fear at bay. Every now and then, Avery would glance back at them, taking comfort in their presence. Lila had fallen asleep, her head resting on Jamie's shoulder, while he fought to stay awake, rubbing his eyes as he watched the door. The cabin felt more like a tomb than a refuge, but it was their sanctuary for now. The faint sound of a twig snapping outside sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through Avery. She held her breath, straining to listen, but the night swallowed the noise whole. It could have been an animal, or it could have been him, the man who had haunted their every step. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Jamie," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Did you hear that?" He looked up, eyes wide and alert. "What do you think it was?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but we need to be ready." He nodded, leaning closer to Lila, who remained blissfully unaware of the danger lurking just outside their fragile sanctuary. Avery felt a pang of guilt for putting them in this situation. This was supposed to be an adventure, a simple night of fun. But now, their lives depended on her instincts and the choices she made. As the hours wore on, Avery felt the weight of exhaustion creeping in. She knew she needed to rest, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the old cabin sent shivers down her spine. The night felt endless, stretching out like a dark maw, ready to swallow them whole. "Do you think we should explore the cabin?" Jamie suggested, breaking the silence that had settled around them. "Maybe we can find something useful." Avery hesitated. They needed to stay vigilant, but the thought of searching for supplies made sense. "Okay, but we stick together," she instructed, her voice firm. "No wandering off." Jamie nodded, his resolve strengthening as he glanced at Lila, who was still sound asleep. "Let's wake her up then," he said softly. Avery nodded, and they gently shook Lila awake. "Hey, sleepyhead," Avery said, forcing a smile. "We're going to explore the cabin." Lila rubbed her eyes and blinked up at them, confusion dancing across her features. "What time is it?" she murmured. "Late," Jamie replied, "but we think there might be something here that could help us." "Are you ready?" "Okay," she said, still groggy but trusting the safety of her companions. The three of them moved cautiously through the cabin, their footsteps echoing softly against the wooden floorboards. Dust particles danced in the dim moonlight that filtered through the grimy window, and the air felt thick with the smell of age and neglect. Avery led the way, moving from room to room, her heart racing with each creak of the floor. They discovered a small kitchen, where old pots and pans hung rusted and forgotten. A few shelves were lined with empty jars, their glass catching the light in strange reflections. Avery searched for anything that might serve as a weapon, something to defend themselves with if the man found them. "Over here," Jamie called, his voice a mix of excitement and fear. Avery turned to see him standing in front of an old trunk, half buried under a pile of dust and debris. The trunk looked weathered, its hinges rusted and covered in cobwebs. "What did you find?" Avery asked, moving closer. "I don't know, but it might have something in it," Jamie replied, kneeling down to pry it open. With a determined grunt, he lifted the lid, and the trunk creaked in protest. Inside lay a jumble of items, a tattered blanket, a few old books, and a rusted flashlight that looked like it hadn't seen the light of day in years. Avery's heart sank. Nothing that could help them. But then she noticed something glinting in the corner of the trunk. "Wait," she exclaimed, reaching in and pulling out a small metal object. It was a key, its surface dull but still functional. "This might be important." "A key? To what?" Lila asked, her curiosity piqued. "I don't know," Avery admitted, holding it up to the faint light. "But it might unlock something we need. Let's keep looking." With the key secured in her pocket, they continued their search, moving cautiously through the cabin. The atmosphere was thick with tension, each moment feeling charged with the possibility of danger. Avery kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the man standing behind them, watching with cold, calculating eyes. They moved into the main living area, where a single window offered a view of the surrounding woods. Avery peered outside, scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. It felt like an eternity before she turned away, but just as she did, she caught a glimpse of something in the corner of her eye, a figure darting between the trees. Her heart raced, a visceral reaction of fear flooding her senses. "Did you see that?" she whispered urgently, turning back to Jamie and Lila, who looked equally alarmed. "See what?" Jamie asked, his voice tense. "There was someone out there," Avery said, pointing toward the window. "We have to get back to the room. We're not safe here." They hurried back to the bedroom, Avery locking the door behind them as panic surged in her chest. "What if he's trying to find us?" Lila whispered, her voice trembling. Avery took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "We'll stay quiet and wait. He won't know we're here." As they settled in, the weight of the key in her pocket felt heavier than ever. It was a reminder that they were not just running from the man. They were also unraveling a mystery that could lead them to safety. The night dragged on, the sounds of the forest growing louder as they sat in silence. Avery could feel the tension in the air, a palpable energy that made her skin prickle. They were running out of time. They needed to figure out what the key unlocked and how to escape this nightmare before it was too late. The tension in the cabin was almost unbearable as the three friends huddled together, the weight of the night pressing down on them. The key sat heavy in Avery's pocket, a symbol of hope and fear intertwined. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing the urgency of their situation. Outside, the forest loomed, dark and foreboding, a barrier between them and safety. "What if he comes back?" Lila whispered, her voice shaking. "What are we going to do?" Avery looked at Jamie, who was gripping the edge of the mattress, his knuckles white. "We need to stay quiet and stay together. If we can just hold out until morning." A loud thud reverberated through the cabin, cutting her off mid-sentence. The sound came from the main room, like something heavy had fallen or been thrown. Avery's heart skipped a beat. "What was that?" Jamie's eyes widened in fear. "I don't know," she replied, adrenaline surging through her veins. "But we have to check it out." "Are you crazy?" Lila exclaimed. "What if he's in there?" Avery took a deep breath, fighting against the rising tide of panic. "We can't just hide here. We need to know if he's here or not." She slowly got to her feet, her instincts urging her to move. "Stay close," she instructed, motioning for Jamie and Lila to follow her. With a flashlight in hand, they crept toward the door, each step filled with dread. The door creaked as Avery opened it, revealing the darkened hallway. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves outside, as if the night itself was holding its breath. She took a step into the main room, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. "What do you think it was?" Jamie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but we need to be careful," Avery replied, scanning the room for any signs of intrusion. The moonlight spilled through the window, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Everything appeared undisturbed, but the unease lingered in the air. Just then, they heard a soft whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Help!" The word floated through the stillness, chilling them to the bone. "What was that?" Lila gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "It came from outside," Avery said, straining to listen. The whisper sounded desperate, almost pleading, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "Maybe we should go back," Jamie suggested, glancing nervously at the door. "We don't know what's out there. We can't leave someone if they need help," Avery insisted, her determination rising. She couldn't ignore the voice, not when it seemed so close. "Are you sure?" Lila asked, her fear evident. Avery nodded, gripping the flashlight tighter. We can't let fear control us. We'll stick together. The three of them stepped cautiously toward the window, peering outside into the inky darkness. The forest loomed, twisted branches clawing at the night sky like skeletal fingers. The whisper came again, clearer this time, a haunting echo that seemed to rise from the depths of the woods. Help me. What if it's a trap? Jamie whispered, his voice shaking. What if it's him, trying to lure us out? Avery considered this, but the desperate tone of the voice tugged at her heart. We'll be careful. We can't just ignore it. If someone is in trouble, we have to help. With a shared look of trepidation, they stepped outside, the chill of the night air wrapping around them like a shroud. Avery led the way, the beam of her flashlight illuminating the ground as they ventured into the shadows. The whisper grew louder as they walked deeper into the woods. Help me, please. Avery felt her pulse quicken, every instinct screaming at her to turn back, but she pressed forward. We're coming, she called out, her voice echoing through the trees. Over here, the voice was closer now, the sound a chilling combination of urgency and despair. They followed the sound, weaving through the dense underbrush, the flashlight flickering as they moved. Each step felt heavier, the darkness closing in around them like a living thing. They could see the outline of a small clearing up ahead, the moonlight illuminating the area just enough for them to make out shapes in the gloom. As they entered the clearing, their eyes widened in shock. In the center stood an old, dilapidated well, its stones crumbling and overgrown with moss. The whisper seemed to emanate from its depths, echoing off the walls in a haunting cadence. Help, help. Avery felt a chill run down her spine as she approached the well. Hello? Is anyone down there? She called, peering over the edge into the darkness below. Help me. The voice cried out again, now more frantic. Avery knelt beside the well, heart pounding in her chest. What happened? How did you get down there? I fell. I can't get out. Please help me. Is it safe? Jamie asked, his voice tense as he hung back, unwilling to approach. Avery hesitated. I don't know. We can try to pull you up. Please. I'm scared, the voice pleaded, sending a wave of guilt crashing over Avery. The urgency was palpable, but doubts crept in like shadows. Do you have a rope or something? Lila suggested, looking around frantically. We can lower it down. Avery nodded, searching the clearing for anything that might help. I'll look around. Stay here and keep an eye on the well. As she turned, a flicker of movement caught her eye, something darting through the trees, just at the edge of the clearing. Avery's heart raced. Did you see that? She whispered, pointing. Jamie and Lila turned, their faces pale. What was it? Jamie asked, his voice shaking. I don't know, she said, anxiety creeping in, but I think we're not alone. The whisper came again, more insistent. Help me, please. Avery took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus on the well. We need to help whoever that is. I'll look for a rope. I'll go with you, Jamie said, stepping closer. We should stick together. Avery nodded, grateful for his support. They moved toward the edge of the clearing, scanning the ground for anything that might be useful. As they searched, Lila stayed behind, her eyes darting nervously between the well and the trees. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the woods, causing all three of them to jump. What was that? Lila cried, her voice trembling. I don't know, Avery replied, panic rising in her chest. Stay close. Just then, the whisper turned into a scream. Help! Get me out of here! Avery's heart raced as she turned back toward the well, feeling an overwhelming sense of urgency. We have to do something, she yelled, her voice cracking under the strain. I can't leave you, Lila shouted, fear etched across her face. Stay together, Jamie insisted, grabbing Lila's hand as they moved closer to the well. We'll get you out, he called down into the darkness. The air felt charged with tension as they prepared to act. Avery glanced around, searching for anything, a branch, a length of rope, anything that might help them rescue the voice from the depths of the well. But time was slipping away, and they had to make a decision. Should we go back to the cabin and find something? Jamie suggested, his voice filled with urgency. Avery hesitated. I don't know if we have time. If someone is in trouble, then let's just try, Lila urged, her eyes pleading. Please. Avery took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she prepared to act. All right, we'll try to lower ourselves down. Grab my hand, and we'll make it work. As they formed a chain, Avery felt the weight of the decision settle over them. The night loomed heavy, and the stakes were higher than ever. As Avery, Jamie, and Lila huddled around the well, the chilling whispers from the depths stirred a mixture of fear and resolve within them. The urgency of the situation hung heavily in the air, amplifying the adrenaline coursing through their veins. They had stepped into a world of shadows, where reality blurred with the eerie whispers beckoning them forward. Hold on tight, Avery instructed, her voice steady despite the tremors of anxiety coursing through her. She secured her grip on the edge of the well, feeling the rough stones beneath her fingers as she prepared to lower herself down. We need to be careful. We don't know what's down there. Lila nodded, her face pale, and Jamie mirrored her apprehension. What if it's a trap, he whispered, glancing around nervously, as if expecting the forest to come alive with unseen dangers. We won't know unless we try, Avery replied firmly, locking eyes with her friends. We can't just leave someone in need. We have to at least see if we can help. With a shared nod of determination, they formed a chain, Avery gripping the edge of the well as Jamie positioned himself behind her, ready to hold her waist if she needed to go further down. Lila stood at the back, her breath quickening as she prepared to support them both. Let's do this, Avery said, a fire igniting in her gut. She took a deep breath and began to lower herself into the darkness, the cool air brushing against her skin like a warning. As she descended, she felt the stones scrape her hands, each movement taking her deeper into the unknown. Be careful, Lila called, her voice echoing around them. I'm okay, Avery reassured, though her heart raced as she felt the distance from the ground grow. The well seemed to stretch infinitely, a gaping maw of shadows threatening to swallow her whole. When she reached the bottom, Avery landed on something soft, the sensation of relief amidst the oppressive darkness. I'm down, she called back, her voice barely breaking the silence. What do you see? Jamie asked anxiously, leaning over the edge, the flashlight beam illuminating the space around her. The light revealed an underground chamber, damp and musty, with water pooling in the corners. Avery squinted into the shadows, her pulse quickening as she tried to discern any shapes lurking in the darkness. I don't see anyone, she replied, her voice tinged with disappointment. But the voice, it was coming from here. Can you see how far it goes? Jamie asked, leaning further down. Avery took a moment to adjust to the gloom. There's a narrow passage over here, she said, gesturing to her right. I'll check it out. As she moved cautiously toward the passage, a chill slithered down her spine. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the scent of decay. The sound of water dripping echoed softly around her, blending with the faint whispers that still resonated in her ears. Be careful, Avery, Lila called from above, her concern palpable. Avery nodded, even though Lila couldn't see her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself as she ventured into the passage. The narrow corridor led her deeper into the earth, walls slick with moisture and the ground uneven beneath her feet. As she walked, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Help me, please. The words curled around her, wrapping her in a chilling embrace. Avery pressed on, determined to find the source of the voice. The passage twisted and turned, and just when she thought she might be lost, she stumbled into a larger chamber. The space was illuminated by a faint, flickering light that seemed to dance on the walls, revealing more of the grim surroundings. What is this place? Avery whispered to herself, taking in the strange symbols carved into the stone. The air felt charged, as if the very essence of the place pulsed with an ancient energy. Help! The voice echoed from somewhere within the chamber, sending shivers down her spine. Avery scanned the room, her heart racing. In the far corner, she spotted a figure hunched against the wall, shadows clinging to them like a shroud. Are you okay? She called out, her voice trembling. The figure looked up, and in the dim light, Avery could make out a face, dirty and gaunt, with eyes wide in fear. "Please, help me," the person croaked, their voice barely above a whisper. Avery's heart sank. "What happened to you?" she asked, rushing closer. "I fell. I was running from him," the stranger gasped, their voice thick with panic. He comes here sometimes." "Oh." Avery pressed, feeling a sense of dread settle over her. "Who is he?" The figure shook their head, their expression one of deep terror. "I don't know, but you have to get out of here. He'll find you too. Whoever it is, we can deal with it together," Avery said, her resolve hardening. "We need to get you out of here. Can you walk?" The stranger nodded slowly, their eyes darting around the chamber. "I think so, but we have to hurry. He's coming." The urgency in their voice sent a jolt through Avery. "Then let's go." She turned to lead the way back through the passage, but as they moved, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, and the whispers intensified, echoing through the stone walls like a warning. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the chamber, shaking the very ground beneath them. Avery felt her heart drop. "What was that?" she exclaimed, glancing back at the stranger, whose eyes widened in fear. "He's here," they gasped, panic flooding their voice. "Run!" Avery shouted, grabbing the stranger's hand as she sprinted toward the narrow passage. Jamie and Lila's voices echoed from above, but all she could focus on was the need to escape. The ground shook again, and rocks began to tumble from above, dust and debris raining down around them. "Hurry!" Avery urged, pulling the stranger behind her as they raced through the passage, the whispers growing louder, almost deafening. Just as they reached the well, Avery glanced back to see a shadow moving in the darkness, a figure emerging from the depths of the chamber, tall and menacing. Panic surged within her as she climbed up the edge of the well, pulling the stranger up after her. "Help! We're almost there," Jamie shouted, his face a mask of fear. Avery could feel the darkness creeping closer, could sense the danger hot on their heels. With one final effort, she hoisted the stranger over the edge, her muscles straining as she pulled them to safety. "Lila, grab their hand," Jamie shouted, reaching out to help. Just as they pulled the stranger up, a deafening roar echoed from the well, sending a jolt of terror through Avery. She glanced back to see the figure looming over the edge, its features obscured in shadow. "Go, now!" Avery yelled, pushing the stranger toward Lila and Jamie as they scrambled to their feet. Without looking back, they bolted into the woods, adrenaline fueling their flight. The forest closed in around them, branches snagging at their clothes as they raced away from the well and the darkness that lurked within it. "Where are we going?" Lila gasped, breathless. "Anywhere but here," Avery shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. They ran deeper into the trees, the sounds of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. The whispers faded into the background, replaced by the thumping of their hearts and the rush of fear driving them forward. As they slowed, panting and gasping for breath, Avery turned to the stranger. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to catch her breath. "Liam," the stranger replied, their voice shaking. "Thank you for saving me." "We're not safe yet," Jamie warned, looking around warily. "We need to find a place to hide until we know he's gone." "Back to the cabin?" Lila suggested, her face pale. "No," Avery said, shaking her head. "Not after what happened. We need to find somewhere secure, somewhere he wouldn't think to look for us." Avery's mind raced as she scanned her surroundings. The trees loomed overhead, branches swaying in the cool night breeze. There had to be a place nearby, a sanctuary amidst the chaos. "Follow me," Avery said, taking a deep breath and setting off in a new direction, the weight of the night pressing down on her shoulders. With Liam, Jamie, and Lila close behind, they moved silently through the forest, the shadows playing tricks on their eyes. The air was thick with anticipation, and the weight of the unknown loomed heavy, but Avery felt a flicker of hope. They had survived the well. They could survive whatever came next. Avery led the way through the dense underbrush, each step echoing the heartbeat of the forest around them. The darkness wrapped around them like a heavy cloak, and the weight of their recent encounter clung to the air. Liam, Jamie, and Lila fell into a tense silence, the only sound the crunch of twigs beneath their feet and the occasional rustle of leaves overhead. "Where are we going?" Liam asked, his voice barely a whisper. The fear in his eyes mirrored Avery's own anxiety. "There's a clearing up ahead," she replied, her mind racing. "We can regroup there, catch our breath, and figure out our next move." As they navigated through the underbrush, the branches clawed at their clothes, and shadows danced in the flickering light of Jamie's flashlight. Avery's heart raced, a mix of fear and determination propelling her forward. She could feel the darkness nipping at their heels, and she knew they had to keep moving. Eventually, they broke through the dense foliage and stepped into a small clearing bathed in moonlight. The silver beams illuminated the area, revealing a circle of ancient trees standing sentinel around them. A sense of serenity washed over Avery, but the lingering unease reminded her that they weren't truly safe yet. "Let's catch our breath," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. They all sank down onto the soft grass, panting and trying to steady their racing hearts. "What the hell just happened?" Jamie exclaimed, running a hand through his hair in disbelief. "What was that thing?" "I don't know," Avery admitted, her brow furrowing as she tried to piece together the fragments of their encounter. "But it felt alive. It was as if the darkness itself was trying to trap us." "We have to go back for the others," Lila suggested, her voice trembling. "They might still be in danger." "No," Avery replied firmly. "We can't go back. Not until we figure out what's really going on here. We have to understand what we're dealing with first." Liam nodded, his expression grave. "I can't go back there either. I've been hiding from him for days. I thought I was safe, but now..." His voice trailed off, and Avery could see the fear etched in his features. "What do you mean you've been hiding?" Jamie asked, leaning forward, his interest piqued. Liam took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I moved here a few weeks ago, trying to escape some things from my past. I didn't think much of the abandoned house next door. I thought it was just another derelict property. But then I started hearing the screams. They echoed through the night, and I saw shadows moving around it. I was too scared to investigate at first, but then I realized someone might really be in trouble." "Did you see who it was?" Lila asked, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. "No, I just heard the screams, and sometimes I felt like I was being watched," Liam confessed, his voice trembling. "That's why I was running. I thought I could hide from whatever was in there, but it always found me." "What do you think it is?" Avery asked, her mind racing with possibilities. "Do you think it's the same thing we encountered in the well?" "I don't know," Liam replied, shaking his head. "But whatever it is, it's connected to that house. I felt its presence every time I went outside at night. I tried to ignore it, but the fear just kept growing." Avery's heart sank as she processed Liam's words. "So, the house is the source of all this?" "I think so," Liam said, his expression serious. "There's something dark in there. Something that's been waiting for someone to uncover its secrets." Lila shivered at his words, and Avery felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The house had been a source of mystery and intrigue, but now it felt more like a curse, a dark entity lurking just beyond their reach. "What if we went back together?" Avery suggested, feeling a surge of determination. "If we all face it together, maybe we can figure out what's happening." Jamie looked skeptical. "What if it's too dangerous? What if that thing is waiting for us?" "We can't run forever," Avery replied, her voice unwavering. "We have to confront it. We need to find out what's really going on. And if there are people trapped inside, we can't just leave them behind." After a moment of silence, Jamie sighed, his resolve softening. "Fine, but we need a plan. We can't just walk in there blindly." "Agreed," Lila added, her eyes scanning the trees as if expecting the shadows to come alive at any moment. "We need to be smart about this." Avery nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "Let's regroup and come up with a strategy. We need to figure out how to get inside the house without attracting its attention." As they began to strategize, Avery couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows in the clearing felt thicker than before, the air tinged with an unsettling tension. The forest around them seemed alive, each rustle and whisper heightening her senses. "Okay, here's what we'll do," Avery started, her mind racing. "We'll wait until nightfall again, and then we'll make our way back to the house. We need to move quietly and stay in the shadows. Once we're inside, we split up and search for any clues about what's been happening. What if we encounter that thing again? Jamie asked, his voice low. We'll be ready for it. Avery replied, trying to mask her own uncertainty. We'll keep each other close, and if we hear anything suspicious, we'll regroup immediately. The group nodded, a sense of purpose binding them together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Avery felt a mixture of excitement and dread. They were stepping into the unknown, and the stakes had never been higher. After several hours of planning and discussing their options, the sun finally set, and darkness enveloped the forest. The eerie silence of the night set in, and the moon hung high above, casting silver beams that illuminated their path as they began their journey back to the house. They moved stealthily, keeping close to the trees as they approached the abandoned property. The old house loomed ahead, shrouded in darkness, its windows like hollow eyes staring back at them. A sense of foreboding washed over Avery, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the mission ahead. As they reached the edge of the property, they crouched behind a thicket of bushes, the wind rustling through the leaves. Avery took a moment to gather her thoughts, glancing at her friends to ensure they were ready. Remember, stick together, she whispered, her heart pounding. We can do this. With a final nod, they crept toward the house, the ground crunching beneath their feet. As they approached the front door, Avery felt a chill run down her spine, and the whispers began to swirl around her once more, wrapping her in an unsettling embrace. Stay close, Avery urged, reaching for the doorknob, her fingers trembling. She pushed it open, the door creaking ominously as it swung inward, revealing a darkened foyer. Is anyone in there? Jamie called softly, his voice echoing in the silence. No response. The darkness beckoned them inside, and as they stepped over the threshold, the atmosphere thickened, as if the house itself were alive, breathing in their presence. The air was stale and cold, and the shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, warping the space around them. As they entered, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind them, plunging them into complete darkness. Did you see that? Lila gasped, her breath hitching in her throat. Just the wind, Avery reassured her, though her heart raced in response. We have to keep moving. Avery fumbled for her flashlight, flicking it on to pierce the inky blackness. The beam illuminated the room, revealing dust-covered furniture and remnants of a life once lived. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and the floor creaked ominously beneath their feet as they ventured further inside. Where do we start? Jamie asked, glancing around the room. It all looks the same. Let's check the living room first, Avery suggested, leading the way through an archway. The room opened up before them, revealing a once grand space now overtaken by time and decay. Tattered curtains hung limply from the windows, and furniture lay strewn about, remnants of a forgotten existence. As they moved cautiously through the debris, Avery's heart raced with anticipation. They needed to find something, anything, that could shed light on the darkness that plagued the house. Look at this, Liam said suddenly, pointing toward an old, dusty book lying on a broken table. The leather cover was cracked and weathered, and Avery could feel a pull toward it, a sense that it held secrets waiting to be uncovered. Let's check it out, she said, her curiosity piqued. She reached for the book, brushing away the dust with trembling fingers. The moment she opened it, the air around them shifted, a chill creeping into the room as if the house were exhaling its long-held secrets. Inside, the pages were filled with handwritten notes, scrawled in a frantic script. As Avery scanned the words, her stomach knotted with unease. The entries spoke of rituals, of a darkness that lingered within the house, and of sacrifices made to appease it. What is this? Jamie murmured, leaning closer to read the faded text. It's a journal, Avery replied, her voice barely above a whisper. It looks like someone was trying to document whatever is happening here. Do you think it's connected to the screams? Lila asked, her eyes wide with fear. I think so, Avery said, her mind racing. But we need to find out who wrote it and what they were trying to do. There has to be more to this. As they continued to flip through the pages, the entries grew darker, filled with frantic ramblings about shadows that moved on their own and whispers that echoed in the night. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, reverberating through the house like a thunderclap. The four friends froze, their eyes widening in fear. "What was that?" Lila gasped, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Avery replied, her heart pounding. "But we need to check it out." As they moved cautiously toward the staircase, the atmosphere thickened, an oppressive weight hanging in the air. The shadows seemed to stretch and sway around them, whispering secrets just out of reach. Avery led the way up the stairs, her flashlight illuminating the path ahead. Each step creaked ominously beneath their weight, echoing the tension building within the group. They reached the top of the staircase, the hallway stretching out before them, lined with closed doors. "Which way do we go?" Liam whispered, his voice tense. The sound came from the end of the hall, Avery said, pointing toward a door that stood slightly ajar. "Let's check there." As they approached the door, the whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a sinister melody. Avery's pulse quickened as she reached for the doorknob, glancing back at her friends. Their faces mirrored her own fear and determination. "On three," Avery whispered, her heart racing. "1, 2, 3. She pushed the door open, and the darkness within seemed to swallow them whole. The beam of her flashlight flickered, illuminating a room filled with scattered furniture and broken mirrors. At the center of the chaos stood a figure cloaked in shadows, its form shifting and twisting in the dim light. The air grew colder, the whispers rising to a cacophony of voices, drowning out their thoughts. "Get back!" Avery shouted, instinctively stepping forward to protect her friends. The figure turned toward them, its face obscured, but an unmistakable malevolence radiated from it. "What do you want?" Avery demanded, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. The figure shifted, and a low, guttural voice echoed through the room. "You shouldn't have come here." The walls seemed to vibrate with the words, and the shadows around them thickened, closing in like a tightening noose. Avery's mind raced, desperate for a way out. "Stay together," she yelled, reaching for her friends. The darkness pressed against them, and the whispers grew louder, drowning out their voices. "We need to leave," Jamie shouted, panic rising in his voice. "Not without answers," Avery insisted, her resolve hardening. "We have to confront whatever this is." The figure loomed closer, and the shadows twisted around it, forming a vortex of darkness. Avery could feel the energy pulsing in the air, a palpable threat that sent shivers down her spine. As the shadows surged toward them, Avery braced herself, focusing on the journal and the knowledge they had gained. "We know what you are," she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. "You're not going to keep us here." The figure hesitated, its form flickering as if caught between two realms. The whispers paused, the tension in the air shifting. "Knowledge is a burden," it replied, the voice echoing with sorrow. "You cannot change what has been set in motion." Avery's heart raced, her mind racing to process the implications. "What do you mean? What happened here?" The figure began to fade, its presence growing weaker. "Those who entered before you made a choice. They awakened something that cannot be contained." "What do you mean?" Liam asked, stepping forward, his fear momentarily overshadowed by curiosity. "Leave this place," the figure warned, its voice growing faint. "You cannot save those who are lost. The darkness will consume you too." Avery felt a surge of anger and desperation. "No, we won't leave without understanding." The figure seemed to shimmer, the shadows around it writhing like angry serpents. "Then you must face the truth. But know this, darkness never forgets." In an instant, the room plunged into chaos. The walls trembled, and the air crackled with energy as the shadows surged toward them, threatening to engulf them whole. "Run!" Avery shouted, grabbing Lila's hand as they stumbled backward. They turned and raced toward the stairs, their hearts pounding in their chests. The shadows chased them, hissing and howling, a cacophony of voices that filled the air with dread. As they reached the staircase, Avery glanced back, seeing the figure becoming indistinct, swallowed by the darkness. "We have to get out," Jamie cried, his voice filled with panic as they barreled down the stairs. The darkness surged around them, and Avery could feel its icy grip closing in. They burst through the front door, stumbling into the cool night air, gasping for breath as the house loomed behind them, a silent sentinel of secrets and despair. "Did you hear what it said?" Lila panted, her face pale. "Yes," Avery replied, her heart racing as they backed away from the house. "But we need to figure out what it meant." As they stood in the moonlight, the shadows of the trees around them seemed to pulse with life, whispering the secrets of the night. Avery knew that they had only scratched the surface of the darkness surrounding the abandoned house. They had faced a glimpse of its haunting truth, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. "We can't give up," she said, determination filling her voice. "We have to find a way to confront this darkness. It's the only way to save whoever is trapped inside." But as they turned to leave, a distant echo of laughter reverberated through the night, sending chills down their spines. "Whatever happens next, we face it together," Avery vowed, a fierce fire igniting within her. The shadows around them whispered secrets, but they would not be afraid. They would uncover the truth, even if it led them deeper into the heart of darkness. The air felt thick with an unspoken tension as Avery and her friends walked away from the abandoned house. The distant laughter echoed in their minds, haunting them as they tried to process everything they had witnessed. They reached the edge of the woods, and Avery paused, glancing back at the silhouette of the house against the night sky. "Are we really going to go back?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "It's like something out of a nightmare." Avery took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "We have to. We can't let fear control us. Whatever is happening, it's not over. We need to find a way to help those who are trapped. But what if we end up like them?" Jamie interjected, his voice edged with anxiety. "What if we can't escape? Then we'll face it together." Avery replied firmly, determination shining in her eyes. "We've already come this far. We owe it to them to find out the truth." The group stood at the edge of the woods, the shadows of the trees stretching toward them like skeletal fingers. The laughter faded, but an unsettling chill lingered in the air. With a shared glance, they stepped into the darkness, the forest closing in around them. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy of leaves above, casting eerie patterns on the forest floor. The whispers returned, a soft susurrus that filled their ears with unsettling words, secrets wrapped in shadows. Avery led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as they made their way deeper into the woods. "What do you think it means? Darkness never forgets," Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think it means that whatever happened there is still very much alive," Avery replied, her mind racing with possibilities. "And it's waiting for us." As they moved deeper into the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches creaking ominously. Avery could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon them, watching from the shadows. The further they walked, the more oppressive the air became, suffocating and thick. "We should stick together," Liam said, his voice strained. "I don't like this." "Just a little further," Avery urged, glancing at the map they had found in the house. "There's a clearing marked on here. It might give us a better view of the area." They pressed on, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath them. As they approached the clearing, a sense of unease settled over them. The trees parted, revealing a wide, open space bathed in the pale light of the moon. In the center of the clearing stood an old stone altar, overgrown with moss and vines. It looked ancient, its surface scarred with strange symbols that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. "What is this place?" Jamie asked, his voice a mix of awe and fear. "I think it's where they performed the rituals mentioned in the journal," Avery said, her heart racing. "This is where the darkness was awakened." As they stepped closer to the altar, a cold wind whipped through the clearing, carrying with it a low, mournful wail. The air felt charged with energy, crackling as if the very fabric of reality was bending around them. Avery reached out to touch the altar, but the moment her fingers brushed against the cold stone, a vision flooded her mind. Images of shadowy figures danced around the altar, their faces twisted in agony. Dark tendrils snaked out from the ground, wrapping around their ankles as they chanted in a language that sent chills down her spine. Suddenly, she was pulled back to reality, gasping as the vision faded. The others watched her with wide eyes, concern etched on their faces. "What happened?" Lila asked, gripping Avery's arm. "I saw something," Avery stammered, trying to catch her breath. "They were performing a ritual. They summoned something dark, and it consumed them. Maybe that's why the figure warned us," Liam said, his brow furrowed. "They couldn't escape what they had awakened." Avery nodded, the weight of their discovery sinking in. "We need to figure out how to reverse it, to stop whatever is still here." Just then, the shadows around them began to shift and swirl, coalescing into the form of a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. The dark silhouette looked familiar, and Avery's heart dropped as she recognized the faint outline of the cloaked figure they had seen in the house. "Leave this place," the figure boomed, its voice resonating with authority. "You have no idea what you're meddling with." Avery stepped forward, fear and defiance coursing through her. "We're not leaving. We need to understand what happened here." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the clearing. "Understanding will only lead to your demise. The darkness hungers, and it will consume you as it did those before you." Avery felt her heart race as she glanced at her friends, their expressions a mixture of fear and determination. "We won't be scared off. We came here to help." "Help?" The figure scoffed. "You are merely pawns in a game far beyond your comprehension. You cannot fight what has already claimed the souls of the lost." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and the shadows surged forward, wrapping around their legs like cold fingers. Panic erupted as the friends struggled against the encroaching darkness. "Fight it!" Avery shouted, desperately trying to pull herself free. "We can't let it take us." But the shadows tightened, pulling them toward the altar. The figure loomed closer, its presence suffocating as the air crackled with malevolent energy. "We will not let you escape," it bellowed, its voice echoing with a blend of anger and sorrow. Avery's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to focus. Remember the journal," she shouted, trying to connect the pieces. "If we can find a way to reverse the ritual." As if sensing her thoughts, the figure halted, its form flickering uncertainly. "You think you can break the cycle? You are fools to believe you can change fate. Maybe fate can be rewritten," Avery said, her voice rising above the chaos. "We can't give up. We have to try." With renewed determination, she focused on the symbols carved into the altar. She could feel the power radiating from them, a dark energy that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "Avery, what are you doing?" Lila cried, struggling against the shadows. "I'm going to channel the energy," Avery shouted. "If I can connect with the altar, maybe I can reverse the darkness." "Be careful," Jamie warned, fear evident in his voice. Avery took a deep breath, closing her eyes as she focused on the symbols. She reached out, feeling the darkness swirl around her, trying to pull her under. But she wouldn't let it win. As her fingers brushed the surface of the altar, she felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins, illuminating her mind with visions of the past. She could see the faces of those who had come before her, their pain and fear palpable. "You are not forgotten," she whispered, feeling their presence strengthen her resolve. "We will not let the darkness take you." Suddenly, the shadows writhed violently, releasing their grip as if recoiling from her words. The figure screamed in rage, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. "No," it bellowed, the anger in its voice resonating through the clearing. "You cannot change what has already been written." But Avery pressed on, her voice steady and strong. "I can change it. We can all change it." The energy from the altar surged, and the symbols glowed with a brilliant light, illuminating the clearing. The shadows around them began to dissolve, retreating from the brilliance as Avery's determination grew. With a final cry, she released the energy, sending a shockwave through the clearing. The figure shrieked as it was engulfed in light, its form disintegrating into the night. As the shadows retreated, the air felt lighter, and the oppressive weight that had settled over them began to lift. Avery and her friends collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as the darkness around them faded into nothingness. "Did we do it?" Lila whispered, her voice shaky. Avery looked around, her heart racing as she realized the altar was now silent, the symbols dimming to a soft glow. "I think so," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. But even as they breathed a sigh of relief, a sense of foreboding lingered in the air. The night felt different, as if the world around them had shifted. They had confronted the darkness, but at what cost? "We need to leave," Jamie urged, glancing back toward the edge of the woods. "Now." As they scrambled to their feet, Avery's gaze lingered on the altar, a mixture of triumph and dread swelling in her chest. They had fought back, but the echoes of the past still haunted the night. "Whatever happens next, we face it together," she vowed, leading her friends toward the edge of the clearing. The journey was far from over, and the darkness they had glimpsed was still lurking, waiting for the right moment to return. As they stepped out of the clearing and into the embrace of the trees, the moonlight flickered above them, a silent witness to their struggle. The night felt alive with whispers, secrets still waiting to be uncovered. The journey back through the woods felt like a surreal dream, the shadows still lingering at the edges of their vision. Avery led the way, her heart racing with adrenaline and uncertainty. They had faced the darkness, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was merely a temporary victory. As they emerged from the woods and onto the road, a chilling silence enveloped them. The sounds of the night, crickets chirping, the rustle of leaves, had faded into an eerie stillness. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Did we really stop it?" Lila whispered, glancing back at the woods, her eyes wide with fear. "What if it comes back?" "We can't think like that," Avery said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We need to regroup and figure out our next steps." Jamie remained silent, his expression dark and contemplative. Avery could sense the weight of his thoughts, a storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. They reached the end of the street, where their neighborhood began to give way to the desolate stretch of land that led to the abandoned house. As they approached, the house loomed larger than before, its dark windows resembling hollow eyes watching them with malevolence. Avery felt a shiver run down her spine. She turned to her friends, a sense of urgency pressing upon her. "We need to go inside. If there's any chance of finding answers, it's there," she insisted. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Jamie asked, his voice hesitant. "What if we unleash something worse?" "We already faced it once," Avery replied, her determination resurfacing. "We can't let fear control us. Not now." The group exchanged uncertain glances, but one by one, they nodded, their resolve strengthening. They stepped up to the creaking front door, its paint peeling and warped with age. Avery reached for the handle, her heart pounding as she pushed it open. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the remnants of time. Moonlight spilled through broken windows, casting elongated shadows that danced across the floor. As they stepped inside, the door creaked ominously, closing behind them with a finality that sent chills racing down Avery's spine. "Let's stick together," Lila whispered, glancing nervously around the dimly lit room. They moved cautiously through the foyer, the floorboards groaning beneath their weight. Every sound seemed magnified in the oppressive silence, a reminder that they were not alone. As they entered the main room, Avery felt the familiar tension settle over them, the same sensation they had experienced on their first visit. "Where do we start?" Jamie asked, scanning the room for anything that might provide insight. "The journal," Avery replied. "It led us here before. There must be more clues." They split up, each member of the group searching different corners of the room. Lila rummaged through a dusty bookshelf, her fingers trailing over the spines of forgotten tomes, while Jamie examined the old furniture, hoping to find something useful. Avery moved toward the fireplace, where the ashes were still faintly warm, as if the fire had just recently died. She knelt down, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the mantel. A strange symbol carved into the wood caught her eye, one she recognized from the altar in the woods. "What's this?" she murmured, brushing her fingers over the carving. Lila turned from the bookshelf, her eyes widening as she approached. "That looks like one of the symbols from the journal. The ones tied to the rituals." Avery's heart raced. If this is connected, then there might be something hidden nearby. "We need to search for more of these symbols." As they continued their search, Jamie suddenly called out from the far corner of the room. Avery, you need to see this. Avery and Lila rushed over to find Jamie standing in front of an old cabinet, its doors slightly ajar. Inside, a collection of ancient-looking objects was displayed. Dusty bottles filled with murky liquids, an ornate dagger with a handle carved from bone, and a small, locked box that radiated an unsettling energy. What do you think it is? Lila asked, peering into the cabinet, her curiosity piqued. I don't know, but we should be careful, Avery replied, her instincts flaring. These could be remnants of the rituals they performed. Jamie carefully lifted the box, turning it over in his hands. It's locked. If we can find a way to open it, maybe it holds the answers we need. Avery nodded, feeling the urgency of the moment. Let's look for a key. It could be hidden somewhere nearby. They searched the room, combing through drawers and examining every nook and cranny. As time passed, Avery's anxiety grew, the oppressive atmosphere weighing down on her. The shadows seemed to shift in the corners of her vision, whispering secrets that remained just out of reach. Finally, Lila let out a small gasp. Avery, look. Avery turned to see Lila holding a small, ornate key she had found hidden behind a loose floorboard. It glimmered in the dim light, a promise of revelation. Where did you find that? Jamie asked, his eyes widening with excitement. Right here, Lila said, holding it up triumphantly. I think it might fit the box. With shaky hands, Avery took the key from Lila and approached the locked box. She could feel her heart racing in her chest as she inserted the key into the lock. It clicked softly, and she hesitated for a moment, exchanging glances with her friends. Ready? She whispered. As they nodded, she turned the key and opened the box. Inside lay a collection of old letters, their edges frayed and yellowed with age. Avery carefully picked them up, scanning the faded ink. The first letter was addressed to someone named Elias, a name that felt familiar. It's from one of the previous occupants of this house, she murmured, unfolding the letter with trembling fingers. As she began to read, her breath caught in her throat. Elias, I fear the darkness is awakening. I have seen the visions and heard the screams of those who have been lost. We must stop this before it claims more souls. Avery's heart raced as she continued to read, the words igniting a sense of urgency within her. Each letter contained desperate pleas, warnings about the darkness and the rituals that had been performed in the house. There's something here, Avery said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. They were trying to warn future occupants about what happened. They knew the danger, but it was too late for them. Lila leaned in closer, reading over Avery's shoulder. What if we're the next ones they're warning? Avery's gaze flicked to Jamie, who looked increasingly pale. We need to find a way to stop it, once and for all. If we don't, we'll be trapped in this cycle, just like them. Jamie swallowed hard. What do we do? We can't just burn the house down and hope for the best. No, Avery said, shaking her head. We need to find a way to break the cycle. There has to be a way to contain the darkness, to free the souls that are trapped here. As they continued to sift through the letters, Avery's mind raced with possibilities. Each letter contained fragments of a larger story, a narrative that wove through the history of the house and the darkness that had plagued it for decades. Suddenly, Lila exclaimed, Look, this one mentions a ritual to bind the darkness. Avery's heart leaped at the words. What does it say? It outlines a ceremony, Lila read, her voice trembling with excitement. It involves using the altar in the clearing, the same one we found before. If we perform the binding ritual, we might be able to trap the darkness there permanently. Then we have to do it, Jamie said, his voice firming with newfound resolve. We can't leave without trying. Avery nodded, her heart racing. Let's gather what we need and head back to the clearing. This time, we won't be caught off guard. With urgency in their movements, they gathered supplies from the cabinet. Candles, small jars of herbs, and the ornate dagger. Each item felt heavy with history and significance, as if they held the weight of the past. As they prepared to leave, the atmosphere in the house shifted once again. The air grew colder, and a familiar tension wrapped around them like a shroud. Avery glanced toward the door, her instincts screaming that they were being watched. Let's move, she urged, her voice low. They hurried out of the house, the door creaking ominously as it closed behind them. The night felt different, the air charged with energy as they made their way back through the woods, the path illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. With each step, the whispers returned, swirling around them like a chorus of lost souls. The fear that had gripped them earlier had transformed into determination. They were ready to face whatever awaited them in the clearing. As they approached the altar, the air buzzed with an unsettling energy. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the scene. Avery felt the weight of the past pressing down on her, urging her to act. "Gather around," she instructed, her voice steady. "We need to follow the instructions from the letters." They formed a circle around the altar, the supplies spread out before them. Avery took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. With Lila's help, she lit the candles, their flames flickering in the cool night breeze. As they began the ritual, the air thickened with anticipation. Avery recited the incantation from the letters, her voice echoing through the clearing. With each word, she felt the presence of the darkness stirring, a palpable energy that coiled around them. Suddenly, a chilling wind whipped through the trees, extinguishing the candles in a flash. Avery's heart raced as the shadows deepened around them, the forest coming alive with malevolence. "Keep going," Lila shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. "Don't stop." With renewed determination, they pressed on, their voices rising above the growing tempest. As the last words of the incantation left Avery's lips, a deafening silence enveloped the clearing, and then darkness. In that moment, the air crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp around them. Shadows danced, swirling violently, and for a brief second, Avery saw faces, tormented, desperate, and pleading for release. "Hold on," Jamie shouted, gripping Avery's hand tightly. "We can do this." The shadows converged, a swirling mass of darkness that threatened to consume them. But Avery stood her ground, the words of the incantation ringing in her mind, a lifeline in the storm. The darkness shrieked, a cacophony of voices rising in anguish. And in that moment, Avery felt a surge of power within her. It was as if the spirits were lending her their strength, their collective will pushing against the darkness. With one final push, Avery shouted the closing words of the ritual. The energy erupted around them, and the shadows recoiled, twisting and writhing in protest. And then, with a blinding flash of light, everything went silent. Avery blinked, the clearing illuminated in a warm glow. The oppressive atmosphere that had gripped them was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. They stood in stunned silence, the world around them transformed. "What just happened?" Jamie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I think we did it," Lila breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. Avery felt the weight lift from her shoulders, the darkness that had haunted them finally dispelled. But as they began to process what had just occurred, a lingering question remained. "What about the souls?" Avery asked, her heart heavy with concern. "Are they really free?" As if in response, a gentle breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it a sense of relief and gratitude. They felt the presence of the lost souls fading, their whispers replaced by a soothing silence. "We did it," Lila said, tears welling in her eyes. "We helped them." Avery nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of sorrow and joy. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged victorious. But as they turned to leave the clearing, a shadow flickered at the edge of their vision, a reminder that darkness could always return. "We need to stay vigilant," Jamie said, glancing back at the altar. "This may not be the end." Avery felt a chill run down her spine as they made their way back home. The battle had been won, but the war against darkness was far from over. In the weeks that followed, life began to return to normal. The whispers of the past faded, and the oppressive atmosphere that had loomed over their neighborhood lifted. Avery and her friends found solace in their shared experience, a bond forged in the fires of adversity. Yet, as they sat together in their favorite cafe one afternoon, laughter ringing through the air, Avery couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. A flicker of movement caught her eye outside the window, and for a brief moment, She thought she saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the woods. "Avery?" Lila asked, her voice breaking through her thoughts. "Are you okay?" Avery forced a smile, but inside, a nagging doubt began to fester. "It is just thinking." As they continued their conversation, the unease remained, a whisper in the back of her mind. The darkness may have been contained for now, but Avery knew that it was only a matter of time before it sought to reclaim what it had lost. And when that time came, she would be ready to face it once more. The days rolled into weeks, and though the oppressive weight of fear had lifted from their neighborhood, a sense of unease lingered in the air. Avery found herself glancing over her shoulder more often, half expecting to see the dark figure from the woods watching her again. At school, the chatter among classmates had shifted from summer vacations to college plans, but for Avery and her friends, the world felt altered, as if the fabric of their reality had been stretched and weakened. They had tasted darkness and come close to losing everything. The normalcy around them now felt like a thin veil over something far more sinister. One afternoon, while Avery was studying in her room, her phone buzzed with a message from Jamie. "Jamie, can we meet at the clearing tonight? I think I found something." Avery's heart raced at the thought of returning to the site where they had faced the darkness. She quickly typed back, "Avery, sure. Lila and I will be there." As evening fell, she and Lila met Jamie at the edge of the woods. The trees loomed tall and menacing against the twilight sky, their branches swaying like fingers beckoning them closer. "What did you find?" Lila asked, her voice tinged with trepidation. "I went back to the house," Jamie replied, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "I found another journal hidden in a secret compartment. It belonged to Elias. He wrote about the darkness before it consumed him." Avery's breath caught in her throat. "What does it say?" Jamie pulled out the small, worn journal and opened it, revealing pages filled with frantic scrawls. He described the darkness in detail, how it preys on fear and sorrow. He believed it could be bound, but not without significant sacrifice. Lila glanced nervously at the woods. "What kind of sacrifice?" "I'm still trying to piece it together," Jamie said, flipping through the pages. "But it sounds like it might require one of us to confront our worst fear, something deeply personal. It's the only way to make the binding strong enough." Avery felt a chill run down her spine. The thought of facing her deepest fears was terrifying. But what if it doesn't work? What if we make things worse? "Elias thought it was worth the risk," Jamie replied, his voice steady. "We've come this far. We owe it to ourselves and to those who suffered before us." Avery exchanged a look with Lila, who nodded, her expression resolute. "We can't turn back now." As the moon rose high in the sky, casting an otherworldly glow on the clearing, they prepared to confront the darkness once again. The air crackled with tension, and a cold wind whipped through the trees, sending shivers down Avery's spine. They set up the altar, placing the items they had gathered in a careful arrangement. The candles flickered in the breeze, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. Avery felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the echoes of the past urging her to act. "Let's do this together," Lila said, taking Avery's hand. "We're stronger as a team." Avery nodded, steeling herself for what was to come. They formed a circle, their hands clasped tightly, and Jamie began to recite the incantation from Elias's journal. As he spoke, the wind howled around them, and the shadows began to swirl, coalescing into a dark form that hovered at the edge of the clearing. Avery's heart raced as she felt the familiar presence creeping back, the same malevolence they had encountered before. "Stay focused," Jamie shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't let it in." Avery squeezed Lila's hand tighter, her heart pounding in her chest. The darkness writhed, whispering their fears into their minds. Doubt, loss, and despair echoed in a cacophony of voices that threatened to consume them. "Think of your worst fear," Jamie urged, his voice straining against the onslaught. "You have to confront it." Avery closed her eyes, forcing herself to focus. Memories flooded her mind. Her mother's illness, the fear of losing her friends, the terror of facing the unknown. She had always tried to be strong for others, but the thought of losing everything was suffocating. "I won't let you win," Avery shouted, opening her eyes to meet the swirling shadows. "I refuse to be afraid." As she spoke, she felt a surge of power within her, a flicker of light pushing back against the encroaching darkness. The shadows hissed in anger, twisting violently, but Avery stood her ground. "I'm not alone," Lila cried out, her voice ringing with conviction. "We face this together." Jamie joined in, his voice steady as he recited the final lines of the incantation. "By our strength and our unity, we bind you to this place. You will no longer haunt the living." The darkness screeched, a sound that pierced the night, and Avery felt it shift, the weight of fear lifting as light began to break through. Together, they raised their voices, calling forth the power of their bond, their shared experiences, and their resolve. The shadows twisted in protest, but they pressed on, channeling their energy into the ritual. "Be gone," they shouted in unison, their voices resonating with strength. The darkness recoiled, thrashing violently as light enveloped the clearing. With one final push, they released their fear into the night, watching as the darkness shattered, dissipating into the air like smoke. A rush of warmth flooded through the clearing, the oppressive energy replaced by a gentle calm. Avery collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. "Did we do it?" Lila knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face, a smile breaking through the fear. "I think we did. I can feel it. The darkness is gone." Jamie looked around the clearing, a sense of relief washing over him. "We actually faced it and won. Together." As they caught their breath, a soft glow began to illuminate the clearing, revealing shapes that danced in the light. Faces, familiar, yet distant, floated before them, expressions of gratitude etched into their features. Avery's heart swelled with emotion. "They're free," she whispered, realizing the significance of their victory. One by one, the faces smiled at them, a silent acknowledgement of their bravery. The spirits began to fade, merging into the warm light of the moon. In that moment, Avery felt a sense of peace wash over her, knowing they had finally put an end to the cycle of fear. As the last of the spirits disappeared, Avery turned to her friends, her heart filled with gratitude. "We did it. We faced our fears, and we came out stronger." Lila grinned, wiping her tears away. "I can't believe we actually managed to do it." Jamie smiled, his eyes shining with relief. "We faced the darkness and won. We'll always have each other's backs." As they gathered their things, the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, illuminating the woods in a golden glow. The world felt different, brighter, more alive, free from the shadows that had haunted them for so long. But as they walked back through the woods, Avery couldn't shake the feeling that the battle against darkness was not truly over. There would always be new challenges, new fears to confront. Still, she felt a sense of hope, a knowledge that they would face whatever came next together. As the sun rose over the horizon, the world around Avery began to awaken, bathed in a warm, golden light. The clearing that had once been a battleground against the darkness now stood serene, filled with the soft chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. It was a stark contrast to the terror they had faced just hours before. Avery, Lila, and Jamie made their way back to town, the weight of the night's events lingering in the air. They walked in silence, each lost in their thoughts, but the bond they shared felt stronger than ever. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious, but a lingering sense of unease still haunted Avery. "Do you think it's really over?" she finally asked, breaking the silence that had settled among them. Lila looked up at her, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I want to believe it is, but darkness can take many forms, and we can't let our guard down." Jamie nodded in agreement. "We'll always have to be vigilant, but we're stronger together. We proved that last night." As they approached Avery's house, the familiar sight brought a wave of comfort. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and the flowers her mother had planted were blooming brightly. But the memory of the shadows and screams still echoed in her mind, reminding her of how fragile their peace could be. "Maybe we should share what happened with our families," Lila suggested as they reached Avery's front porch. "They deserve to know." Avery hesitated, the weight of the truth heavy on her shoulders. "What if they don't believe us? What if they think we're just kids making up stories?" They will believe us, Jamie said firmly. We went through something real. It's important to tell them. We can't keep this a secret. Taking a deep breath, Avery nodded. You're right. They need to know. As they stepped inside, the familiar smell of breakfast wafted through the air. Avery's mother was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. The sound was a comforting reminder of normalcy, but Avery felt an urgency to speak about what they had encountered. Mom? Avery called out as they entered the kitchen. Her mother turned, a smile brightening her face. Good morning, sweetie. Did you have fun with your friends last night? She asked, her eyes sparkling. Actually, we need to talk, Avery replied, her heart pounding. It's important. Concern flickered across her mother's face as she placed the spatula down and walked over. What's wrong? With Lila and Jamie by her side, Avery took a deep breath and began to recount their harrowing experience, the screams, the darkness, and their struggle to confront their fears. She could see the worry etched in her mother's features, but also a flicker of understanding as the story unfolded. When they finished, the kitchen fell silent. Avery's mother looked at each of them, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and pride. I can't believe what you went through, she said finally, but I'm so proud of you for facing it. Do you think it's really over? Avery asked, her voice trembling slightly. What if the darkness comes back? Her mother knelt down to Avery's level, taking her hands in hers. There will always be challenges in life, my love, but you are stronger than you know. You have friends who will stand by you, no matter what. That's what matters. Avery felt a swell of gratitude for her mother's support. In that moment, she realized that while they couldn't erase the darkness entirely, they could learn to face it together. The shadows that had haunted them might return, but they had the strength and courage to confront whatever lay ahead. After breakfast, they decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood, eager to share their story with others. Avery felt a renewed sense of purpose as they walked, the sun shining down and illuminating the path before them. As they approached the neighbors' houses, they saw familiar faces peeking out from behind curtains, whispering amongst themselves. It was a different atmosphere today, one of curiosity and cautious optimism. Avery could sense the lingering fear from the past few weeks, but she also felt hope beginning to take root. We should talk to Mrs. Thompson, Lila suggested, pointing to the elderly woman who lived at the end of the street. She always has the best stories about the history of the neighborhood. As they approached Mrs. Thompson's house, they found her sitting on her porch, knitting a colorful blanket. She looked up, her eyes brightening at the sight of the trio. Good morning, dears, she called out, waving them over. What brings you here today? We wanted to talk to you about something that happened in the neighborhood. Avery began, hesitating as she searched for the right words. It's about the abandoned house next door. Mrs. Thompson's expression changed, her knitting pausing mid-stitch. Ah, that old house, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. There have always been stories about it, you know. Some say it's haunted. Avery felt a chill run down her spine. Haunted? You mean? Oh dear, yes, Mrs. Thompson continued, her voice filled with intrigue. Years ago, a family lived there, a family that fell into despair. They say the father was lost to darkness, and the screams of that family still echo in the night. It's why no one dares to go near it. Is that true? Jamie asked, his eyes wide. Could the darkness still be there? Mrs. Thompson nodded gravely. Evil never truly leaves a place. It lingers, waiting for fear to return. You must be careful, dear ones. But I commend you for confronting your fears. Not many have the courage to do so. Avery felt a sense of responsibility wash over her. They had faced the darkness together, and now it was their turn to share that strength with others. We want to help, she said, determination hardening her voice. We want to make sure the darkness doesn't return. Mrs. Thompson's eyes sparkled with appreciation. Then you must share your story. Help others understand that they too can confront their fears. It is through courage and unity that we can keep the shadows at bay. With renewed purpose, Avery and her friends continued to spread the word, sharing their experience with neighbors and friends alike. They encouraged others to speak openly about their fears, fostering a sense of community that hadn't existed before. Days turned into weeks, and as the seasons changed, so did the atmosphere of their neighborhood. Where once there had been whispers of fear and darkness, there now blossomed a sense of hope and connection. They organized gatherings where stories of triumph over fear were shared, fostering a community that thrived on understanding and support. Avery often returned to the clearing where they had faced the darkness. Each time, she felt the presence of the spirits they had freed, their gratitude echoing through the trees. It became a place of healing, a reminder of the strength that came from facing their fears together. One night, as she sat in the clearing with Lila and Jamie, the stars twinkled above them, and the world felt at peace. They talked about their hopes for the future, the dreams they had for their lives beyond high school. "I want to be a writer," Avery admitted, her heart racing at the thought. "I want to tell stories that inspire people to face their fears. I want to become a psychologist," Lila said, her eyes shining. "I want to help others navigate their darkness. And I want to become an advocate for mental health awareness," Jamie added. "There's so much stigma surrounding fear and mental illness. We can help change that." As they shared their dreams, a soft breeze rustled through the trees, as if the forest was whispering encouragement. Avery felt a sense of purpose swelling within her, a realization that their experiences had shaped them in profound ways. They had faced darkness, but they had emerged into the light together. The bond they had formed would guide them through life's challenges, reminding them that they were never alone in their battles against fear. As they left the clearing that night, Avery glanced back one last time. The stars shone brightly overhead, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had taken. The darkness had been fierce, but it had only served to illuminate the strength they carried within. "Here's to new beginnings," she whispered to herself, a smile breaking through as she walked forward, ready to embrace whatever came next. With their hearts filled with hope and resilience, they stepped into the dawn of a new beginning, a life where fear was acknowledged, but never allowed to control them. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.